From a young age, the heavy burden of being a hero who had to save the world fell on the shoulders of a young boy. People were calling him for help from all sides. As a young boy, it was hard to accept this fate, and I asked my mother more than once about the fact that people around him call him a hero and why he had to become one for them. He really wanted to stop it, because this fate is very difficult and painful, and he put his hand on my shoulder. My mother pushed him into the cruel world, saying that he was the hope of the world, so he had to be strong for the sake of everyone. All tattered and exhausted from the battle, the awakened Kim Sung-il was recovering from the battle on the concrete in the rain. My body hurt, but I had to get up because there was still a lot of work to be done in this destroyed world. So, after a little rest, he got to his feet, picked up his sword, and looked down, where, in the pouring rain, many monsters were waiting for him and were eager to fight. Smiling and exhaling air, I thought that, as usual, there was no time to rest because of them. In addition, this time there were more of them than ever before, even though he had a magic coefficient of 97 and a rank of 9. Such a large number of these animals could have caused a lot of trouble, but there was nothing to do, so it was necessary to destroy them all, and he fearlessly rushed down from a height to send them back to where they came from. But that's what they were waiting for, and when they saw him attacking, they rejoiced and roared with one voice. Before they could even realize anything, the sword blade passed through them, taking their lives. Rejecting one monster after another only gave me more confidence in my abilities, so he tried to direct the blow to the ground with his sword with all his might in order to get away with it. A tectonic wave was formed that was able to roll a bunch of these creatures around. Despite his strength, fatigue was getting closer and closer, but the monsters were not getting smaller. On the contrary, there was a huge man who looked at him and said that he was indeed a true hero of humanity. He introduced himself as Fafnir, appreciating its great power and recognizing that he deserved to be a part of it. So he had to defeat him and take away this enormous power, so he hit him incredibly hard that Kim Sung-un was thrown several meters away. The blow caused many wounds, the cut eyebrow bled, and the muscles started to hurt even more. My fatigue level reached 97%, so when I looked at Fafnir, I thought it was really the end. Even all the monsters around stood and watched in silence. Being a hair's breadth away from the end, he was worried that he could not protect anyone. Looking at him, Fafnir shouted at him not to talk such nonsense, and pointed his fist at him. After a few minutes of darkness, he opened his eyes a little, and everything in front of him was unclear. I hadn't even realized that he was alive, and that he was okay. And some strange guys called him Kim Soo-hyun, and laughed that he had suddenly fallen unconscious. He opened his eyes wide, as he could see that he was still alive. He stood up like a ghost, his eyes blank, which frightened the people around him. However, he did not even pay attention to them, but looked at his hands and stared at them for a long time. Then I noticed that the sun was shining brightly, and the sky was clear blue. The guy with white hair began to get annoyed by this incomprehensible reaction. They thought that he was sleeping and saying something incomprehensible about a certain Fafnir, but since he woke up, it was time for a battle. So their leader grabbed him by the shirt, asked him to stop talking heresy, and recommended that he clench his teeth. He could not believe that he had managed to survive, and the guy's fist almost reached his face at that moment. But his hands intuitively intercepted the guy's blow, and his body moved back as if he was not controlling it. Because of this, the blow missed him, and it was so fast that he didn't realize anything. It was the perfect moment to punch him in the face in response. The offender flew a couple of meters away from them, holding his legs up. Then I realized that something was wrong, and I didn't even know how it happened. Holding his swollen face, he shouted that now he was surely finished, but they were interrupted by another young man who shouted that the police had arrived. While running away, they shouted to Kim Soo-hyun not to even think about skipping school tomorrow because he would feel bad about it, and he thought about who they were talking about, since his name was Kim Seong-in. When he got to his feet, he held his stomach and still had a lot of questions, and noticed a phone lying on the ground. I picked it up, thinking it must be one of those guys who needed to carry nice things with them, but the phone looked like it was 20 years old. When I saw a face in the reflection of the languid screen, I was completely dumbfounded and wondered who it was in the reflection. In the year 2042, the world came to an end after dungeons began to appear in different parts of the earth and monsters began to emerge from them. These events were called the Outbreak, and it destroyed the peace of the world. But on the other hand, there were people who went to fight this catastrophe. People around the world began to call such people awakened, and he was one of them. Even after the people were gone, he was the last to stand and fight the monsters, remaining the last of the people and the strongest awakened. During his interrogation at the police station, the police officer asked him various questions and first wanted to know his name. Almost saying his old name, the officer stopped and told him that he was Kim Soo-hyun and asked him when his date of birth was. He asked him to answer as soon as possible because he was thinking too long. Looking at the calendar there, I thought that if memory serves, it would be 2042, but time had rolled back 20 years. After thinking about it, he said that he was 19 years old, and his appearance corresponded to his age. The officer then asked for his home address, but he could not know it. The man was a little angry because he didn't know anything but his name and date of birth, but he was sitting in his thoughts, thinking that Fafnir had killed him 100%. So it could have been a dream or some kind of magic, although I remembered that those feelings were real. He did go back in time, but he wondered what happened to the present, and what he should do now and how to return to his body somehow had a lot of questions to figure out. Exhaling, the officer stood up, tired of this conversation as there was no point in talking to him, and said that his mother would be arriving soon, so he had to wait for her. He advised him that after he left the police station, he should just stay at home and not go to construction sites, because that's where it happened most often. These words made them wonder what he meant by this, and a woman burst in and immediately grabbed his face and shouted questions about why he was here. She took a good look at him, calmed down, and calmly asked him if he was okay and called him her son. He looked at her with a very surprised look and began to realize that she was the mother of the owner of the body he was in. When he returned home in the evening, his mother asked him how he hadn't memorized his home address yet, but he immediately answered that it was probably because of the stress of the move. He confirmed that she was probably right and that she was surprised that her son used the official language because he usually did not use it. He wondered what to say to her and whether he should apologize for the situation. His mother held out a handkerchief to wipe his face, saying that she had heard that the children were always bullying him and knew that today was all because of them. She asked him to come to her in the future when they do the same thing, so that he would not be afraid and would come to her. Taking him by the hand, she promised that she would not allow this to happen again to the best of her ability. Then I changed the subject because I noticed that the places where they pass are somehow very empty and there are no people. Not far from them, an animal with healthy claws and white fur was already watching from the bushes. My mother asked him why he stopped, why he didn't go on, but something seemed to disturb him inside and he suddenly heard something. And the sound was as if something was approaching and getting closer and louder, so I turned around to see what it was. When he looked, he saw a wolf running at them, so he immediately rushed to the side to protect his mother and throw the animal away. When he stopped, I took a good look at him again and saw that it was not a usual wolf at all. This animal in front of them was 100% a werewolf, and then I realized what the policeman meant by that. In 2022, the outbreaks occurred much more frequently, and it is possible that the monsters appeared in the city center. The problem was how to deal with them. First, I would have needed a weapon and noticed an umbrella on my backside. He grabbed it and stood in front of his mother, who was frightened because she had heard on the news that the monsters had been dealt with and there was nothing to worry about. Looking at the werewolves, he thought that even though he was not tied to this body, he had a chance to deal with them. While waiting for one of them to attack, he could have wounded him with an umbrella, and he even recoiled. The second one, meanwhile, grabbed the umbrella with his teeth and tried to advance, looking menacingly at his prey. When the monster was knocked down, he could not imagine that he could not do anything to a low-level monster, and if he was in his body, he could deal with them with one attack. He wished that he could be awake at the moment, so that everything would be different. But meanwhile, another one was coming from the side. But he never made it because his mother intervened and jumped on him, and she managed to knock him down. I clearly did not expect this development and could not look away. The mother managed to help her son, but it cost her a heavy fall that caused injuries. Unable to give up easily, Kim Soo-hyun kicked the werewolf in the stomach to throw him away. I ran to my mother to make sure she was okay, but she was unconscious. He lifted her up and brought her to her senses a little bit, but he scolded her for interfering, which was very dangerous. But his mother quietly whispered that she was fine, and that the main thing was that he got out of there alive. The werewolves woke up and were ready to attack again, their mouths dripping with saliva and their eyes fixed on them. However, in an instant, they felt that the guy was giving off an evil and dangerous energy. He turned to them and said in a quiet, calm voice that they had one last wish. In an instant, the evil beasts shook in his gaze. They could see their end. To save themselves, they left with incredible speed. But Kim Soo-hyun shouted after them that he would not let them go and would definitely find them. But he suddenly fell to the ground in a heap, not even realizing what was happening to him at first. After his face was covered with sweat, I realized that this body had very little endurance, which also meant that he was very weak. When he woke up, he lifted his mother on his shoulders, although it was quite difficult for him, but it was time to go home. He stopped for a second and looked around and realized that he still didn't know where his house was. However, I finally got home and laid my mother on the couch, but she was still unconscious. I was lucky to find my home address in my wallet because I had to wander the street. Being unconscious, my mother kept saying that he would be fine because she was with him, and that she would protect him, so he should just run away. Listening to this, I could not believe her words. This gave us reason to wonder why she was willing to put herself in such danger. Looking at her unconscious, I could not believe that a mother would do such a thing for her son. I looked further at my hands and wondered how weak this body was, that it couldn't fight off several monsters. And despite those events, it has evolved into something so weak. And also, why did he have to repeat all his mistakes from his past life again? I pulled myself together because I needed to calm down, and it was very important to keep your cool in times like this. He saw a gate open behind him, and a voice saying that the user was confirmed. The gate was opened for Kim Soo-hyun, and the task was prepared for him. He stood there and saw that it was the gate of the abyss, which meant that this body had some kind of awakened talent. And it also meant that he could start again as Kim Soo-hyun, and he thought that even then, in 2022, he also started as an ordinary person. But this time, there was one peculiarity. He entered the abyss earlier than then. So there was no reason to hesitate, and he entered the test tower. The Tower of Trial and the Abyss are the same place. They were voids in which various demons lived and suffered forever. As soon as the first floor is cleared, then a person could be considered awakened. And with each floor, the tower's power will only grow. That's why most people tried to go as high as possible. But despite this, the system in the tower was more important than the floors. Next, the system asked him to choose a difficulty level from 1 to 10, and he chose the 10th. Despite the fact that this is the first floor and the higher the level, the stronger the enemies, and the stronger they are, the higher the reward, but of course the risk is higher. The first floor exam tower has begun creating an exam of the 10th level of difficulty. Because of the awards, he chose this level of difficulty and hoped that he would be okay. In the past, he always chose the 8th level. I changed my outlook and became more serious, as I had to do my best this time and even more. If you follow the same path as in the past, you will meet the same end. Then the system surrounded him with weapons and offered to choose the weapon he liked. And when the first monsters appeared, the system wished me good luck and informed me about the start of the exam. A few hours later, night descended over the city, and the moon rose in the sky above the houses. On one of the streets, werewolves attacked a man who was begging and screaming for help. In an instant, Kim Soo-hyun appeared, saying that he had finally found them as promised. They did not have time to do any harm to the man before he managed to fight off one of them. With the help of an umbrella he picked up in the park, he was able to destroy the first werewolf. Then I saw how the other one was dumbfounded and shaking with fear and shouted to him to stop worrying. Since he would soon join his friend, the system immediately reported that Kim Soo-hyun had cleared the first floor with the 10th level of difficulty. The news reported that recently, the amount of land open for farming has increased by about 3 times. Suddenly, the dungeons and the exam tower appeared, which caused discussions, all of which appeared at the same time. No one knew what they were at first, but interest grew rapidly. And while people were finding more and more options for using energy from the found resources and ethereal stones, the price of them skyrocketed. The rewards found in the dungeons influenced not only everyday life, but also the economy of the countries that became rich and famous for clearing them. And in some places, a phenomenon called an outbreak was found when monsters fled from the underground to the real world. As the dungeons grew, more and more powerful monsters made their way into the real world, and in 2028, this catastrophe will destroy the world. One sunny afternoon, in one of the places in the test tower, people were discussing their ranks from the exams, and the way they went through their tasks, but they were all interested in one name of the newcomer. On the rating board, they saw that the first place winner had 2,230 points, and the second had 940. A huge difference. These figures were almost unrealistic, which meant that a new star had appeared here, and they were interested in who Kim Soo-hyun was. When I entered that place, I exhaled and was glad, because I hadn't been in that place for a long time. The Tower of Exams. In his past life was a huge world where a huge number of awakened people could gather to explore the floors. Each floor is its own world with its own cultures and climates, and they all had something in common before going up. At the moment, everyone is on the second floor and you could easily find all the resources here, but you need to collect the right amount of points on the first floor. After killing all the creatures on the first floor, we could breathe a little sigh of relief. The system reported that he had passed, but he thought that if it weren't for the memories from the past, he would not have been able to cope with the 10th level. I also felt one peculiarity. The more he fought, the more feelings came back from the past. At this pace, I thought I could make it to the end, and even the system thought I had done a great job. She awarded a large number of points for passing at such a high difficulty, and the advantage was that the characteristics grew faster than in the past. He was quite happy with the number of points he received, which meant that he could go shopping right away. And right where I was standing there was a bookstore where you could find a lot of interesting things. A young girl stood at the checkout and kindly greeted him and smiled. She could tell that the guy in front of her had just come up here, so she told him to tell her what he needed. She was a skill trader for the dark elf Veli, and offered her help if he was having trouble choosing something. Kim Soo-hyun knew her and knew that she was using the ability to seduce people into buying things without thinking, but he would not succeed because he already knew what he wanted. It was a jumping skill, and he also needed a transformation skill, and she liked this choice. But the kid asked if he could buy it, since the jump cost 150 points and the transformation 1,000 points. While she was talking, he put his hand to the table and paid her the entire amount at once. However, Veli screamed because she thought something was wrong with the scores and what he had just done. No one had ever scored more than 1,000 points on the first floor, so I asked if he had really come from the first floor. Then Kim Soo-hyun smiled and said that of course, he was just getting up, and told her that he was just an ordinary customer. One guy who was also there was watching the conversation the whole time. When I was done shopping, I opened the bag with my inventory to inspect what I had bought. Namely, I bought a sword, spear, bandages and medicines, and food, and then got 2 books on skills to start analyzing them. Each skill had a required mana level. The skills would be stronger if they were improved, and the mana catalyst was also quite important. But it could only be purchased at a low level. It will increase the level of mana and regulate it in relation to its abilities. It could be purchased in the store when the exams were over as an item that would increase the magic power to the desired level. It is quite easy not to notice when looking at this store, as you are constantly thinking about the next floors. But if you are careful, you can find hidden treasures. Thinking about how useful it is to have memories from a past life and to know about the transformation and the catalyst is quite useful in the early stages. But he was interrupted by a guy who came up behind him, apologized, and asked if he could give him some attention. When I turned around, I didn't recognize him at first, and was worried that I hadn't been able to feel his presence for 3 whole seconds. But the boy smiled and apologized again, as he did not want to scare or embarrass me. When I looked at him, I could see the sweat on the front side of his cheek. I immediately remember a picture of him standing on a pile of bodies he had destroyed with swords in his hands, and his name was Choi Hak-jun. He was a genius among all those awakened in the abyss, but he is in the near future. He will be the main culprit in the disaster that happened in a large guild because he destroyed all its members. Standing in front of him, I made a rather funny expression on my face, and a question was running through my mind. Why was he looking at him so closely? Or maybe he had something wrong with his face, but he said he was a little surprised. Kim Soo-hyun noticed that this guy had a much more bloodthirsty aura in the past, and asked him what he wanted. Then Choi Hak-jun admitted that he had been following him from that very moment in the store because he thought he had an eye for buying equipment. So I had one small proposal for him, whether he would like to join his team. Next was the second floor, where his task was to escape with the treasure of the Charles Bow clan. Evil clan members will come after him, so his task was to keep the treasure and survive. Large lizards that walked on 2 legs and had weapons were looking for him all over the area. They were monster hunters, who were very good at finding their prey, so it was difficult to escape from them. And it was also not clear why the mission was so difficult, as it was useless for him, except that he needed to be saved. I wondered which of the methods of preserving it was the best. And he came down from the tree in front of the hunter, drawing his sword to start the fight. The lizard that was first in front of him didn't stand a chance against his attack. The blade went through it like butter. The task of surviving in the forest was ridiculous, but it could be interpreted as meaning that you had to get rid of everything in the forest. And it was also quite a rewarding activity, as you could get a lot of points. As they moved in groups, the battles could become longer, and it would be more profitable to come here with a team, but because the difficulty will rise after the 5th level, it would be difficult to recruit people to the team Choi Hak-jun wanted to play on the 8th difficulty level. But he refused him, because the 8th level was too low for him to achieve his goals. Then the boss of those creatures joined them in the battle, riding a large lizard. But he was only happy that he had finally arrived so that he could deal with this task as soon as possible. Using the skill he had learned, he jumped quite high up the mountain. Destroying the boss was just a matter of one skillful swipe of his sword across his body. The 2nd floor of the tower was rewarded with the unique ability of the Charles clan's treasure, which had the ability to heal everything and restore its owner instantly. Holding the pendant in his hands, he did not expect the reward to be so high, so the idea of destroying monsters instead of running away turned out to be better. With the help of the transformation, I managed to remove the boss's berserker ability, which enhanced physical abilities for a while, which will help in difficult situations. Although it was difficult, the benefits were greater, and if we can continue to grow like this, we should definitely succeed this time. At home, he opened his mouth in one place and did not know what to say. There was a table in front of him with a large variety of food, and with his fatigue, he needed just that. My mother apologized because it was the least she could do to thank me for saving her, and she was sure that I was working hard enough at school, so she wanted to make it nice. However, he noticed that she was also very tired because she went to work with such injuries. She smiled and said that everything was fine and she had no problem cooking for her son. These words moved him, and he sat down at the table, but at first he could not even touch the food. Then he barely took the first spoonful of rice, chewed it, and whispered that he was very grateful to her for this, even though he could not become her real son, but he would definitely protect her. She looked at him, and her face was embarrassed that she couldn't even touch the rice. The way he ate quickly and voraciously made it clear that he was very hungry. After dinner, I sat down at the computer to look at the statistics and was very surprised because of the large number of points everyone in the chats was talking about him. The problem with the messages was that there were so many that it was impossible to read them. An even bigger problem was that he attracted a lot of attention. Meanwhile, in Seoul, in the Gangnam district, there was a large skyscraper that was the headquarters of the Aries Guild. Choi Hak-jun was sitting in one of the offices, flipping through his phone until something caught his attention. The man who was sitting in the room with him was surprised that only the guy with the most points had all the chat and news, and asked him if he had heard anything. He thought about it, but had no idea who it could be because he hadn't met him before, since the tower was not small. Then a man came up to him and put his hand on his shoulder, saying that there was a more important issue at the moment. He was curious about the 3rd floor, realizing that it was the 8th level of difficulty, but he couldn't leave it without causing problems. Choi Hak-jun replied that he was currently looking for people to go with him, but because of the complexity of the situation, there were no volunteers, but if he did, he would go himself. However, the man said that if he did not have enough people, he would try to find them for him, but that he should not think about anything but passing. And after it passed, I reminded him of his true mission, which he had undertaken to fulfill. After the conversation, he would go to his room. He didn't like his boss, and he couldn't get that guy out of his head. At first, I had a hunch that Kim Soo-hyun might be the guy from the bookstore, but there was a little chance of that because he didn't look strong. In general, he thought that the best way out for him was to focus on his personal path. After the third floor was successfully cleared, the rest of the floors went by easily and quickly as if they hadn't been there. This mother thought all the time that her son was preparing for the entrance exams and, as a reward, allowed him to go on vacation. Kim Soo-hyun looked at his mother before leaving the house and said that he would call her whenever possible. Then he smiled and asked her not to be sad because he would be back soon, which she would not even have time to realize. A year has passed from the beginning of my awakening to this day, and I have already walked 9 floors, but I hoped that it would all go faster. He was nervous after passing the entrance exams, but he was more happy that he did so well in clearing the 9th floor. Then came the 10th, which would have taken much longer to complete, and was an excuse to go farther away from home for a vacation. For the awakened ones who challenged the tower, the 10th floor was a barrier that had to be overcome, with the difficulty of the task increasing every 10 floors. How much more complicated it is that even the 11th and beyond were easier, so most people chose smaller levels. But because of this, the floors became more complicated. And in order to pass it, he had to become many times stronger than he was. The Green Dungeon was supposed to appear in Anyan in a year. It was supposed to be a huge outbreak, the first time humanity was threatened. And sometime after that, the incident in Kengido on New Year's Eve was the next one, and it was the future that needed to be changed. Looking back at the beautiful sunset, he thought for a minute and decided that he would definitely change it, and this time he would be able to protect everyone. After a while, he came to the 10th floor of the exam tower. There was a man sitting there who said that he knew 100% where he was going. I did not try to stop him, but asked him to give me at least a coin before entering. It was the gatekeeper of the 10th floor. He reached out to him, thinking that most people who saw the beggar were just passing by, and that this person's role was very important. And when his hand was over his, he handed the man 5,000 points of achievement. He was surprised because everyone ignores him and leaves, but he gave a generous gift, and Kim Soo-hyun said that they just don't know his importance. The man thanked him for the gift in such nice words and decided that he had to repay him with some information. And then he asked me to share everything he knew about the 10th floor. Although it was very valuable information, I could not refuse after such a gift. Scratching the back of his head, the man looked at him and told him to be careful with the head of the village. That's all he could tell me. There was nothing else to tell or suggest. Kim Soo-hyun thought that this information was quite two-sided and had always been true, so it was enough. The goalkeeper wished him good luck and to be more careful before he went inside. The system told the awakened Kim Soo-hyun that the 10th floor had begun and asked him to choose the difficulty level. Of course, he chose the 10th level of difficulty without any hesitation. Then the task was to find the target of this test and to deal with it in order to stay alive if possible. Not far from the village, one of its residents was picking wild berries. The little girl was happy that she had finally managed to pick a whole basket of berries. And I thought that if she was so good today, she might let me try one. But suddenly, a large paw of a lizard monster appeared in front of her. The girl quickly ran away, calling out loudly for help, and the lizard followed her. She looked back, tears in her eyes as she had no chance to escape and only a miracle could save her. Kim Soo-hyun, who appeared in time, asked him to hold on tight and use the ability he had stolen with the help of a berserker transformation. My eyes began to glow red, and I felt a powerful strength in my hands. The system, which made it easy to bring the huge creature to the ground, reported that he had managed to defeat a huge salamander. As soon as he stopped and his abilities disappeared, he looked at the child and asked if he was okay. When he took her home in front of him, the girl's mother closed the door and did not even want to hear that he had managed to save her and that he had not kidnapped her. But she was screaming from the other side of the door and did not want to believe him, suspecting that he might have ulterior motives. And finally, she said that there was no point in him stealing children and holding them hostage in this village, as there was nothing to steal. Realizing that he would not be listened to, he walked further through the village, but he was embarrassed that they thought he was a kidnapper. There were no people on the street. People were looking at the stranger from the corners and windows of houses. The system informed him that he was in a village that was in danger, so he needed to be rescued. In addition to the gloomy atmosphere, the locals were hostile to him, so this floor was really very different from the rest. But there was something strange about the task of saving the village, and it seemed that there was something else hidden, and more information was needed. People continued to hide in different places, and barely peeked out to see them off. It was bad, because it was almost impossible to find out anything from them. The people in the middle were also called NPCs, game creatures that are very similar to real players. They were incredibly similar to real people, as if they were not programs. On this floor, the NPCs were afraid of him like the plague, so the village seemed very anxious and desperate, which was very reminiscent of those times from the past, when the world was approaching its end and people who did not feel it were very strange, as if they were up to something. Sitting under a tree, I thought I had to meet a person who had information to make at least some progress, but there were not even ants, let alone people. Then the little girl he had saved in the forest came up and looked out from under a tree and said, "Uncle." This caught his attention, and the girl reminded him that he had saved her just in case. She quickly ran up to him, poured the berries she was picking into his hands, and ran back to the tree. Although she was very frightened, she wanted to thank us for saving her and thank us. Pleasantly surprised, I looked at her and then thought, exhaling, and wanted to do her good too. He took out a bag and asked her if she wouldn't mind coming over to him for a while. The girl came over and looked into the sack and saw a large amount of delicious food. After choosing a whole loaf of bread, she was happy beyond belief. Her eyes were burning and she stuffed her cheeks full of bread. Kim Soo-hyun asked her if the hunger was due to the lack of food in the village, and she said yes. That's why people were so cold, because they were afraid that the food might be taken away. It was not an easy time for the residents, but they are holding on thanks to the head of the village. Since people around him considered him a hero and her father also thinks so because the head works hard to protect him, she asked him why he came here. Smiling, he said that he was curious how their village head was doing, as he thought he could help him, or could deal with the monsters near the village. The girl went on to say that there was only one monster then, and that the residents did not know when they would destroy the village. But those monsters could not get to them, and it was all thanks to their heads. This was much more interesting and made me think about this person. As soon as he wanted to ask her more, two men approached. They had heard about a stranger who had come to the village. The man with the beard greeted them and was glad to see them, and introduced himself as the head of the village. I immediately recalled the words of the goalkeeper before entering the floor that I should be careful with my head. The man apologized and had something to say right away that food was in short supply in the area and he could have been sad in the middle of the village. Since he did not ask him for permission to distribute food, he hopes that he will stop doing so. And I would be very grateful if he would restrain himself and not exaggerate the daily norm. While Kim Soo-hyun was looking at them with caution, the girl even dropped her bread. He said that he was just a passerby who happened to stumble upon the village, and if they didn't mind, he wanted to stay for a couple of days. The chairman switched to the child as he repeatedly told her not to take food without permission. The girl lowered her head and shook a little and barely said that she was sorry. She felt that her interlocutor put his hand on her head and told her not to be afraid. Getting to his feet, he said that he had shared his food with her and was not going to harm the village. I took out a spatial bag and threw it in front of them so that they could look into it and see for themselves. That he had enough food for them, the man who was in his head did not believe that this was possible. There was plenty of food. And if they give him a place to stay, he promises to share his food as long as he stays with them. Even if this would not have been enough, the chairman did not let me finish, saying that it was more than enough. He asked me to follow him and let me stay in one of the vacant houses. As they passed by the square, I heard a preacher calling on God to forgive these young lambs. Then I realized that all the people from this village were here and listened to the man on the stage. It was like a religious ceremony because the village is going through a difficult time, so it's no accident that they trust the gods. And I've seen this more than once. On the verge of the end of the world, people started to go crazy, and everyone in their own way. Some hid behind the face of faith, others did not want to accept reality and began to do terrible things. And of course, in the end, there is nothing left. But one moment caught my attention to such an extent that sweat broke out on my face and my teeth clenched. A man on the stage raised his hands in the air and said that they were making this sacrifice, this spoiled soul. In return, I want to ask the generous God for the same generous peace, his pitiful lambs, and dropped his dagger on the rope, cutting it. The floor under the bound man opened, and he fell into a dark, deep pit. And immediately, the pit slammed back shut, and loud screams came from there. It made me notice and think that this place was just as cruel. All people are the same, and no one changes wherever they go. The people felt sorry for the man, but it was all necessary for the sake of the village, because the head had borrowed power from the god of the earth to protect them, so sacrifices were needed. The next sacrifice had to be made in 3 days, and in order not to choose among them, they knew who would be next. The chairman's right-hand man reported to him that the ceremony went well, but they had not yet found the next victim. The chairman asked how their traveler was doing, and the answer was that he was not doing anything wrong, so the man realized that he wanted to use the boy as a victim. To calm him down, he said that God himself had called him here and wanted to give him this substance to make him fall asleep and throw him underground. The village was becoming more and more dangerous, and a small donation was necessary for all of them. He looked at him slyly and asked if he didn't want to continue living as a local. A monster snake appeared under the village, and it eats only people. But there were advantages. It stopped the other monsters, so the village was still safe. Everyone in the village is currently in a panic because they don't know when the monsters will attack them. And there was only one thing he could do as the head of the village, and that was to sacrifice the inhabitants of the village, so he had no regrets and had to do it as a hero. 4 days later, people in a cloak and with a torch in their hands under the cover of night. They wanted to live very much, so they could have sacrificed the traveler without a doubt. So they apologized to him for their actions, but he slept sweetly from that substance. While cutting the rope, the head was still convincing himself that he was making this sacrifice for the sake of the village. Then the rope parted, and Kim Soo-hyun fell into a deep, dark pit like the man in front of him. He fell into a place where a huge monster snake lived, protecting its future offspring. The head went down to the dungeon to check on the traveler since it had been a whole day. Most likely, the snake had digested it, so it had to spit it back out. And he remembered that that time, the monsters came from the north. So we had to make sure that she was there in time to protect us. But when I saw the picture of what was there, my mouth dropped open. Kim Soo-hyun turned his head to look out of the corner of his eye to see who had come to greet him. And against the background of the destroyed snake, he asked the man what brought him here. He was shaking and sweating, and it was hard to understand what it all meant and how this impossible thing had happened. But he smiled at the words, impossible, because he spoke as if this monster was not supposed to be destroyed. The chairman shouted that it was all for the sake of the village, and if this monster had not marked its territory, other monsters would have attacked it. His words for the sake of the village were also absurd because it could have been his personal gain. The village head's face changed, but he did not know that the boy knew something. Then Kim Soo-hyun said that he knew something about the monster. Its name was a predatory snake, and it spent most of its time eating and sleeping and marking its territory. Because of this, most monsters will not attack this area, and there was another feature. The person who feeds it will never become prey for it. It was only a guess, but it seems that knowing these nuances, one could think that he wanted to show himself as a hero by feeding the locals to this monster. Leaving him on his ass with the snake, he added that his hypocrisy was over. People were shocked to see the monster's head and hear the truth about the head. Many people lost their loved ones, some husbands, some wives, and could not believe something so terrible. The people were very shocked that the chairman was deceiving them and feeding them to the monster, but at the same time, the other monsters could not attack because of this. They asked him what he was going to do since he had destroyed the snake and received a reply that he would help them. I wanted to show them that I had brought them eggs laid by the same monster. People were very surprised and shocked. He understood what they were thinking, but asked to hear him out. He told them that this predatory snake has a peculiarity that will not destroy its feeder. With this feature, they could raise snakes and not have to worry about sacrificing them again. The locals had a very logical question about how they would feed them, and he said that they would feed them monsters. At first, he will catch them, but since he is a traveler, he will leave the village, and then they will destroy them themselves and feed the snakes. A man from the crowd shouted how they had to do it because all they had were household tools, and in his opinion, they had to destroy the monsters. When he heard it, he asked a counter question. Wasn't it their village, and if they didn't defend it, who would? And if it's not easy for them, they can just give up and give up everything, and just continue to sacrifice themselves. The unwillingness to protect oneself and constant dependence on others provokes the creation of these very heroes. But maybe he was really wrong about people who had lost their will, so he had to think of another way. And I heard a child's voice shout from the crowd that they would do it, and the child hid behind his mother. I looked at her and recognized the little girl I had rescued and fed. She said she didn't know how useful she could be, but wanted to protect her family. Kim Soo-hyun smiled at her. She was courageous and a real good girl. He leaned down to her and said that if everyone joined forces, he was sure they would be able to defend the village. The girl promised to help very diligently, and then told the crowd that even a child says she can do it. The mood of the crowd changed, and one of them shouted that they would at least try it, which was still better than being eaten. They started to say they would try, but one of them said that the locals were very cowardly, and they used only what he gave them because he asked him to teach them how to fight. The system threw up a window in front of him that said the villagers had gained willpower and progress had been made by 60%. Well, if everyone was talking like that and was serious, then we could start. Meanwhile, the chairman was coming down the stairs calling Kim Suk-heng names, and how dare he humiliate him without knowing anything. When I reached the end, I said Kikeki a couple of times, and then the creature woke up. Looking at her, he conceived an evil plan to use her to destroy them all. The training was successful, and they even learned to paw birds that looked like crows. Then we had to put the children of that snake under the village, and the locals would start feeding them, so they would not eat them. And they looked at the guy who stood there and wanted to defeat the centipede, and he was amazing to them in every way. Even though she was very fast, she was unable to catch up with him with even one attack. Her efforts were doomed to failure as he managed to defeat her with a single swipe of his sword. The men shouted to him that the sun had almost set, so they asked him to stop. He agreed, saying they could go and that he would be right back as soon as he was done with this monster. The message box said that the exam tower on the 10th floor was 90% complete. I would have liked to finish the task, but the passage became very slow, and perhaps this was due to the disappearance of the starosta. Then the ground shook underfoot, and very quickly, something came out of the ground. I looked up and saw a large blue bird flying up into the sky. It was the only predator capable of attacking the snake, the god's bird of blue fire, and it was all over its head. He shouted that everyone was looking at how scary she was and how shiny her powder was worth it. And with something like this, he thought that the villagers would again accept him as a hero because he would be the head and would be able to control it. Looking at him, he said that the bird was his child and he had raised it, so he asked to be his. But the bird of God froze in midair and directed a column of blue flame at him. Horivshi screamed in pain and did not understand why he did this to him, and it could not have happened, and disappeared, scattering on the ground. When Kim Soo-hyun was hiding from that pillar of fire, he could not even imagine that the creature had such power. A big problem arose after the bird's head was destroyed, and it headed for the village. We had to catch up with him as quickly as possible and stop him before he caused any trouble. To intercept it, he used the jump ability and drew his sword to reach it. He waved his sword and slipped past it, which meant that he could not overcome it so easily. While he was falling, a bird decided to attack him so that he would no longer be bothered. The blow was strong enough to cause injuries and bleeding in some parts of the body. But Kim Soo-hyun didn't care much about that. He couldn't let the creature get to the village because he managed to convince the locals. Two men were walking and talking to each other that their traveler had been gone for a long time. In fact, he hasn't slept for about a day now, probably because he is young. Youth gives you a lot of strength, and if they had it too, simple monsters would be no match for them. Kim Soo-hyun untangled the rope to the end, landed on the edge of the house, and jumped back. The men turned their heads as they heard strange sounds coming from behind them. They saw that a big blue bird was hovering above them in the sky, looking at them. The cry of one voice resounded throughout the area. They were not yet ready for such monsters. The bird began to accumulate air in order to use the fire flame again. Suddenly, from somewhere, a sword wrapped in rope flew very fast at the bird. Wrapping circles around the beak, the rope squeezed it more and more, and the ability to move was interrupted. And if you couldn't get it, you could lower it down, so it was definitely caught. So while he had a chance, he could have used the transformation to take away his abilities, but something happened. Meanwhile, the mother at home was talking calmly on the phone to a friend about her son's decision to take a vacation after his last exam. I didn't even worry and was sure that he was fine, and I had the feeling that he seemed to have grown up instantly, and sometimes it seemed as if he was a different person. At this time, on the 10th level, Kim Soo-hyun gritted his teeth in pain as he was enveloped in blue flames. But he still had some strength to fight the pain of the bird's attacks and wanted to use transformation. But the ability was not activated because the level of this ability was not enough to cause damage. The bird was also increasingly trying to inflict fire damage on the enemy using a column of fire. I could not stand it any longer and shouted loudly that this fire was incredibly hot. When my body seemed to be leaving me, the thought flashed through my mind that I couldn't stay here like this. Then I suddenly remembered the pendant that I used to protect from lizards and thought it was a useless thing. But as it turned out, it had valuable properties. I asked myself to collect my thoughts and felt confident that I could still fight. Then I took Charles's treasure pendant with the restoration element, and the system reported that all the wounds were healed and there were 4 more uses left. As soon as the bird turned around, he saw that his enemy's damage had disappeared and the fire had also disappeared. Kim Soo-hyun could not help but use this opportunity to attack and immediately swung his sword at him. Landing on its back, the sword penetrated the creature's body at least a little, but this time it should have worked. The two of them fell in the center of the village, which created a column of dust and a roar. God's blue bird was lying in a hole that had formed after the landing, and its body showed no signs of life. Kim Soo-hyun opened his eyes and watched for a minute to make sure he had won, and then his eyes closed out of exhaustion, and he fell asleep lying on the ground. After a while, the girl called out to her uncle more than once, hoping that he would hear her. He woke up abruptly and screamed as he was afraid that he was being called loudly. The people in the room were happy that he was okay because they saw him burning in the fire. He asked them what had happened, as he had lost consciousness and did not understand anything. The men reported that thanks to him, the bird was destroyed, so there were no more problems, and they also divided the bird's body so they could feed the snakes for a while. They echoed the words that had been said earlier, that they could not believe how he was burning in the fire and survived. That was enough for them to call him a hero, but he modestly replied that he was just lucky, and that, apart from the pain in his muscles, he was fine. As soon as the girl ran up and hugged him, the system reported that he had received 1,000 points, the highest award, and the 10th floor was completed. I breathed out a sigh of relief and realized that there was nothing more to worry about and the locals could live in peace. And the ranking has also become high, and it will be loud again because of the first place on the internet. Even more people came to visit him and called him a savior. They will never forget it, and every resident of the village is grateful to him. I was slightly surprised by this picture, and all I could do was silently stare at the happy residents. As soon as he recovered, he wanted to return to reality, and as soon as he wanted to leave, a familiar voice stopped him. The girl frightened him with her sudden appearance, ran up and asked why she was leaving without telling anyone. She continued to ask if he was going to save the second village, and Kim Soo-hyun said that he might be and wanted to leave quietly. Then she handed me a bag that at first glance was filled to the brim with something. She also added that no matter where he was and when he was, they would never forget him, and in the bag, there was some fruit she had picked. She raised a small hand and said her name was Melly, thanked me on her behalf, and said goodbye. He liked her very much because she was very sincere and kind for her young age, smiled, and said goodbye as well. A black car was racing through the streets of the city, the driver wanting to get people to the place as quickly as possible. On the left side of the back seat, Choi Hak-jun was sitting with his hand on his head, thinking about something. His mentor, who was traveling with him, noticed this, and after several attempts to draw his attention to him, asked if he was worried. He replied that his mentor never laughed, saying that of course he could be worried about being the best among the newcomers. And he added that if he managed to get to the 15th floor, he had at least B rank, or could even try to become A rank. And if the topic of newcomers has already come up, then he knows that Kim Soo-hyun's rank will also be evaluated soon. This caught Choi Hak-jun's attention, and he asked him how he knew, and he replied that it was just intuition, and since he had cleared the 10th floor, it was time for an evaluation. He realized that even though he knew about this information, Kim Soo-kyung had attracted considerable attention from his mentor Ju Donan. He also said that if he could somehow meet him, no matter if it was in the tower or the exam hall, he would definitely bring him to the guild. And perhaps by recruiting Kim Soo-hyun, he will finally be able to let him go. They drove up to the house where the Commission for Certification of the Awakened was located. Ju Donan said that when he was done, he would prepare everything so that he could climb to the top of the abyss. Therefore, he needs to speed up after he finishes the exam, and if he makes something up, everyone will suffer because of it. Climbing the stairs, I breathed out a sigh of relief as I was finally alone. Kim Soo-hyun arrived at the same place and stood right behind him on the phone. When I checked that I had gotten there correctly, it was great because I hadn't confirmed my rank for a long time. The Commission for the Certification of Awakened Ones is a commission run by the government here. Awakened Ones could find out their rank. Even if it was a newcomer or a foreign awakened one, they had to deal with everyone, and you can think of it as a place of management of awakened ones. Many people visit this place to enter dungeons or get A rank and also to make money. A man in a black suit led him into the hall and asked him to sit down on a chair. Those who confirmed their rank became active awakened ones, and if a person had both a good physique and skills, they were recognized by everyone. And because of this, guilds often came here to recruit some promising people. To avoid unnecessary questions, the man said that when everything was ready, they would call his name and tell him everything. Suddenly, a cry was heard throughout the room. One of the awakened people did not like the result of the measurement because they gave him a D level and he wanted at least a C. The worker explained to him that the requirements for obtaining a rank had changed and they could not do anything, but he grabbed him by the robe and shouted that it was not his problem. The income received from the land depended on the rank, but even so, such behavior is not acceptable. As soon as the awakened man lost his nerve and swung his fist to hit the worker, another man intervened and grabbed his arm. Choi Hak-jun knocked him to the ground and broke his arm, but he noticed something that surprised him because he did not know that anyone used such things. Kim Soo-hyun watched this action as he did not expect him to appear. While the scoundrel was screaming to let him go, he said that the artifact on his hand temporarily increased his magical power. Also, this item is not available in ordinary stores, and he did not know where he got it from, and although he was a low rank, it was a pity that he had a lot of money. And if he thinks that people here are fools who just want to look at their abilities, he offered to take the test again, but without the bracelet. The guy knew he was caught alive. He opened his mouth because his arm was hurting, but he could not say anything. And then Choi Hak-jun realized with an evil smile that if he dared, he would not even get the rank of D. The guards who approached took control of him and told him that they were escorting him to the exit. When they took him away, I thought that it was good that it ended that way because I was not in the best mood, as I was a little worried. Suddenly, someone behind him caught my eye, greeted me with a greeting, walked closer, and asked, "Does he remember seeing him on the second floor of the library and when he came to the bench?" Then they began to ask each other who was taking which test, and they would both take it first. But Choi Hak-jun asked if it was too early for him to take the test, even if he was an equal. And scratching the back of his head, he replied that he was a special case. Mentally, I thought that of course, I wanted everything to be secret, and that no one would look at me and ask me questions when I was taking the test. But he still knew that he was on the 15th floor, and if he hadn't turned it in yet, he could have taken all the awards from the ground. The smile immediately changed to a rude look because it was all due to personal circumstances. Kim Soo-hyun immediately remembered what he looked like in his past life and that dangerous look. Choi Hak-jun thought that they had already met a couple of times and didn't know each other's names, so he was called for the test. When they called me, they named the guild Ares, and I remembered one guild that he destroyed. Looking at him, I was very curious about what led him to make such a concession. Then the employee said that Choi Hak-jun from Ares had a rank of 4th load of 44, and the rank was B. Kim Soo-kyung congratulated him, and noticed that he didn't seem very happy for a person who had received such a rank. Next, the employee asked Kim Soo-hyun, a loner, to come over to take the test. Immediately, the room became animated. People started whispering and saying it was not a newcomer here. While Choi Hak-jun was looking to see who it was, he stood up and said he would be back soon. My shock was overwhelming, and I immediately remembered my boss's words. If I ever met him, I would bring him to them. He also thought loudly that if his ghost was his, he might be free, but he did not expect it to be this guy. I felt bad because I had seen him for a long time and wondered how such an unremarkable guy could be so outstanding. Kim Soo-hyun left the building with a heavy exhale and felt good that he had finally gotten his rank. Still, there was something that could not please me because I did something stupid. When he approached the measuring device, the worker asked him to direct mana into the meter. As soon as he raised his hand over the device, he began to channel mana and the purple color appeared. but in a split second, the mana escaped and illuminated the entire room. It was very powerful. Choi Hak-jun, who had been watching closely, noticed this and was shocked, and immediately realized that he was not using his usual mana. The people who were there did not notice anything strange, as it happened very quickly, only saying that they had a strange feeling. The employee announced loner Kim Soo-hyun has a 3rd rank strength level of 29 and is therefore assigned C rank. For Choi Hak-jun, this seemed impossible as it could only be a C rank. It would at least have to be an A rank or higher. He heard people around him saying that they probably just had the same name because it was a common name. Looking at him, I was sure that no one else felt it, but I was sure that it was this person. Kim Soo-hyun looked at him for a long time, but still did not know for sure. The meter showed that this guy had a C rank, so he could have been mistaken, and thought that no one could control their rank and strength level. Even if he is a genius, this is possible only for the awakened national level. Kim Soo-hyun hoped that he had done a good job and that they could all believe in what he had shown. Even though it was only for 1 second, he felt like he was losing control of his mana. It was lucky that I was able to get it under control, otherwise it could have ended badly, and it was all due to the rapid increase in the level of abilities. Although I thought that maybe it was normal since I did clear the 10th floor on the highest difficulty level. And the most important thing is that the rewards were very good. The skill gained after defeating the bird was very strong and effective, especially against monsters. The characteristics have grown, and even more than that, I liked the store. The items in it were very different from before the 10th level. The problem was that among all those items, I could only buy an egg of an unidentified creature. But he had to buy it because it was the only item he didn't know how to get, even though he was confused about what it was. However, there was an awakened one in his past life who was lucky enough to pick up an egg and became a runner with the help of the power of a divine being. It has been lying there for quite some time, and nothing has happened to it as long as it is not empty. As I was walking, I heard someone calling Kim Soo-hyun behind me, so I stopped and looked to see who it was. It was Choi Hak-jun, and he thought he had already left, but it turned out he was in the toilet, and he asked how it went. Then he looked at Kim Soo-hyun, and his voice changed tone a little bit, and asked if he would be angry about one question, and they shouted at him. The guy who was humiliated in public at the measurement test was waiting for him to come out to get even because he had been working for a long time to get at least a C rank. I immediately remembered how he tried to deceive everyone with the bracelet, so it's not clear why he's trying to take revenge. Although it was a great chance to see how strong Choi Hak-jun is. The guy suddenly became stiff and began to shake. Sweat appeared on his face and his teeth were clenched. A man came up behind him and touched his shoulder, which caused his condition. It was his mentor who asked Choi Hak-jun why he was late, as he was waiting for him. Kim Soo-hyun asked who he was, and he whispered that he was the head of the Aries Guild. Ju Donan, hearing his name, asked not to be addressed so formally. Hugging the boy and putting his arm around his shoulder, he reminded him that he had asked to be called Hen. Then he looked at him angrily and said, "Wow." It wasn't long before his student made a new friend, and Choi Hak-jun said that he had met this person at the training center. I wanted to offer him to join their guild if his rank was high enough. It sounded interesting to the mentor, because if he was interested in it, it meant something special, and he would check it out himself. He came up and greeted me on the backside with Choi Hak-jun, trying his best to attract my attention. When he noticed this, he did not understand what he wanted from him and why he was behaving this way. But he put his finger to his mouth, hinting that he should keep quiet and not say anything else. He became a little calmer, so I warned my new friend. But he looked down at the man and said in a calm voice that his name was Kim Soo-hyun. Ju Donan's face was filled with a smile as he wanted to get it for himself. To help Choi Hak-jun out once again, he said that it was not the same Kim Soo-hyun who had the C rank. My mentor returned and ordered me to keep quiet, as he was the one who decided everything. So I asked the guy to show me his awakened card, and indeed it said that he had only C rank. Handing the card back, he said he was sorry because he looked very much like the one he was looking for, and if he was him, he would have called him to the guild. The head of the guild cannot invite an ordinary C-ranked awakened to his place, so let him apologize for disturbing you, but if he is interested, he should come to them for a test. But I heard in response that even if he turned out to be the rumored Kim Soo-hyun, he would never join them. Because if he joins a guild in which the head does not know the value of people's lives, what can happen to him? Ju Donan sneered and threatened, and if he saw what happened to those who challenged the guild members, they deserved to be punished. Kim Soo-hyun told him that this guy was a D rank, and that was very strong for self-defense. Laughing all over the street, I noticed that they think and look differently, since there was a rule that no one could engage in combat between the awakened, even if it may turn out that one will destroy the other in the process. Passing by the guy's body, he added that the more awakened he is, the higher the chance that he will get away with anything. A guild in which no matter how strong the head is, it is a guild that will not be anything, even his, they will massacre. And doesn't everyone want to join a guild like his? Kim Soo-hyun replied by recalling his own words that they think differently. Hearing this, he turned around and walked to the car, saying that they had nothing more to talk about, and told Hak-jun as he called his student to follow him. He started to leave, but first apologized to him for the situation. But Kim Soo-hyun's hand did not allow him to go further by stopping him. Looking at it, I saw that it contained a folded piece of a leaf. Then I heard that if he needed any help, he could call me at any time. Kim Soo-hyun looked at them, paying special attention to Ju Donan, who was the head of the Aries Medium Guild and an A-ranked awakened. At home, I decided to look at some information about him on the internet. He used to be a criminal and was known for throwing his fists into battle before he became awakened. But after awakening, he gave up crime and founded a guild. Interest-bearing loan services and trading in illegal goods were all in his past life, and people still called the Aries Guild dirty. And the way he destroyed that guy confirms this, and as the saying goes, a leopard will not change its spots. So he was clearly hiding something, and he also thinks that Choi Hak-jun also had something against him. But instead, nothing came to mind, and I wondered what had happened between him and the Aries Guild. Leaning back in my chair, I thought that I would have to find out, and it also meant that I had a lot of work to do. Looking out the window for a moment, I noticed how quietly and calmly the snow was falling. Because when the end came, the world was frozen, there was no snow or rain, and the situation was getting worse every day. At that time, he did not know that peace and quiet was such a great luxury, and the new year was already approaching. And I remembered, because I had forgotten because of Hak-jun and the exam, that I had another reason to go to the tower, the reason I stopped going up. And it was not because of the rank, but because it was necessary to obtain an awakened certificate to participate in raids. That's why I had to take the test. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gone there, but I couldn't wait any longer. I also knew that one incident would happen soon, but I thought that if he couldn't fix it, I didn't even think about it. He was not the only C rank there, and according to the database, he had no experience, so he had to wait to see if he would be chosen. Thinking about Ju Donan, I had a thought that if I repeated that trick again, although I didn't want to do it, I could have tried to deceive them. In one of the cafes, a man and a woman were sitting and talking to a C-rank hunter and Monseok, who had the 12th level of dungeon clearing. There was also Lee Enmi, a C-ranked mage of the 8th level of dungeon clearing, and Kim Yoon, a C-ranked doctor of the 5th level of clearing. The woman noted that this team was not bad, but there was nothing special about it as long as they interacted well. The man said that they were all just mediocre loners, and the woman hit the table with her fist because it sounded rude and she was one of the candidates. After calming down, I accepted his opinion because it didn't matter who was in the team as long as he was with them. And I asked Mr. B-ranked awakened person Lee Juho to calm down at his place. Even if they have him and he won't leave, and they needed one more participant, the woman asked why and what he was afraid of. For him, safety was paramount, as there are now very high statistics of not returning from the dungeon at all. He stopped climbing the tower because he didn't want to waste his life, and then what was the point of staying in the dungeon, and received a message on his phone. She understood and said that she could do as she saw fit, and that she had to obey the leader. After reading the message, she told Juho that for his happiness, they received another application, but this person's name was Kim Soo-hyun. The easiest way to show differences in dungeon difficulty is to use colors. The closer the color got to purple, the harder it became to get through the dungeon. The orange dungeon was the second easiest in the ranking. If the squad had C-ranked awakened, then it was easy to pass. But this orange dungeon was a little different from the others. To get to it, you had to come to Gyeonggi province near Seoul. When he arrived, the head of the squad greeted him as they were waiting for him. I noticed that Juho was the last one to arrive and shook hands with him, saying that it was nothing, they had just come. I also had to introduce myself again. Officially, his name is Lee Juho. He is the leader of the squad. He asked the rest of the group to love and pity him, pointing to the guy and saying that he was Kim Soo-hyun. Seeing that a member of the group reacted violently, I had to clarify that he and that Kim Suk-hyun had the same name, that Kim Suk-hyun had C rank, and that this was the first raid. He was also very surprised at first, and when he heard it, he was equally surprised. When I saw that everyone believed me, I was glad that I managed to fake the rank, and if everyone continues to believe, I will be happy, so it is better not to show the level of skills at first. Then a girl came up and was indignant that she wanted to see the real Kim Soo-hyun and not a newcomer with the same name. She asked if it was too small for a raid and whether it would be useful to the team. To such impudence, he replied that he did not think he should listen to this from a similar C-rank hunter. Of course, she could not let this go unanswered, so she shouted that she should not even think that they were equal because of their equal rank, because she was still better. A woman with red hair asked them to calm down as it was time to go if they were so ready to shout at each other before entering the dungeon. She only turned her head, saying that she would see who would behave during the raid. The woman with the red hair was Kim Baroon, a friend of Lee Juho's and his assistant. Then a girl came up to him and said hello. She said that her name was Kim Yoon, and she would be a doctor during the raid in this unit. She asked me not to worry about what had just happened, as some awakened ones like to brag to other awakened ones. He had little interest in Yoonmi, but one person standing off to the side caught his eye, so he asked for him. Kim Yoon didn't even know Juho, and Baroon seemed to know who he was. He told them that he would not show his face and name for personal reasons, but they were convinced of his rank, so I am sure that everything will be fine. Kim Soo-hyun looked at him and knew it was not good that he was so secretive. There was a reason why he stopped climbing up the tower and came here to the orange dungeon. And this is because everyone who enters the dungeon now will not return from it. On January 1st, 2024, all members of the unit were killed in a dungeon. A strange incident that took place in a dungeon with a simple cause that was not complicated, but which attracted attention, was the confirmation of the deaths of 5 people. But it was discovered that there were 6 people in the squad, which meant that the real killer was among them. Because of his involvement, the squad grew to 7 members, but this only meant that there would be 1 more victim to protect the squad members, and the criminal had to be found. So he had to do everything in his power and even more. While he was flying in his thoughts, Juho was giving a briefing and asked Kim Suk-heng if he understood everything, and he said yes, even though he hadn't heard him at all. As we entered, I told everyone that they shouldn't worry too much. After all, it was just an orange dungeon. When I said that there shouldn't be many monsters here, one of the huge monsters was standing behind me, and even if there were, they would be like beasts. As soon as I saw the faces of the others, I realized that something was wrong and turned around and saw that a real huge green cyclops was standing in front of them, swinging a club in an attempt to kill them. Kim Soo-hyun was the most surprised by this appearance, why this creature was here. They had never been in the orange dungeons before. We all barely managed to jump away from his baton attack and stay safe, but something strange was happening here. Cyclops appeared in dungeons of the yellow level and above, which could mean only one thing. It was a dungeon with an increasing level of difficulty, just like the transformation of growing skills is in God's Bluebird. Therefore, this dungeon had a similar property. Before they entered, it was orange, and when they were in the middle, the level rose to yellow. So, the reason for conquering this dungeon was because of the unexpected increase in difficulty. But even that didn't explain much, because criminals can't change the level of complexity, and if one of them was a murderer, this situation was just right. However, it was not clear who it was among them. Everyone looked frightened, and Juho tried to bring everyone to their senses. Yunmi screamed that they were doing what they could, that they had to run away as fast as they could. This is a yellow-level dungeon, and they are not ready for it. And one of the lower-level dungeons stuttered for a reward, and she got even more angry, shouting that no reward is important in life. She asked how they were going to destroy such a monster, so she said she was leaving, but Kim Suk-heng stopped her and made her think about what would happen to the others if she left. All their arguments were interrupted by a cyclops who rushed in for a second attempt to destroy them and barely managed to get away. It was bad. The whole team was definitely busy doing the wrong thing, instead of uniting to fight. Only Ju Hong understood the complexity to the end and was able to protect his people from the attack. It took a lot of strength to stop him, which meant he wasn't lying for his B rank. But there was one thing. He didn't have enough experience to resist the cyclops, so he kicked him. It was so hard that his back hit a rock, and he got a dent in it. This caused panic in the squad because their main B level was hit with just one blow. Shu Hong was saved from the last blow in his life by Kim Soo-hyun, who became an obstacle between the Cyclops and him. His friend immediately ran to him and asked how he was, and fortunately he was fine. While she was picking him up, Kim Soo-hyun kept holding the Cyclops club until he sent a blow with his right fist. To avoid serious injuries, he had to quickly retreat and use his abilities. People opened their mouths and asked the same question, how he managed to evade so easily. In anger, I asked them how long they were going to stand there, and they had to pull themselves together. Even if they wanted to, they couldn't just do it. Then, another participant, who did not have a name, said that there was no way out. The way was blocked. Kim Soo-hyun mentioned that starting from the yellow level, the entrance and exit work differently. Once you enter, you can't leave until you find the way. Juho confirmed his words, but he didn't know why the difficulty level had changed. Then the ground began to tremble as if an earthquake had started, and he realized that something was about to happen. They are surrounded by a large number of monsters, and from now on, they will have to fight to escape. He just shouted that he was going to wear a cyclops and disappeared in a second before Juho could finish. But he had other tasks, even though the monsters that surrounded them were not strong, but there were many of them. Kim Soo-hyun even estimated that there were 30 monsters. On the way to our main enemy, we managed to destroy a couple of them. With the exception of the cyclops, the rest of the monsters were of orange level, and can be left for the rest. Of course, even in such a large number, he was able to deal with them all at once with his skills. But it was not yet time to focus on the cyclops, as the target was strong. Usually his weakest point is his eye, but it's not the eye on his head. His real weakness is his hidden eye, and to get to it, he had to try to attack it by surprise. Landing on his hand, which was holding the club, he looked at him directly in the eye. He stood there, unmoving, just looking at him, waving his sword in front of his face. I pierced his arm with all my strength, as I was sure that the hidden eye was there. This was the reason why he was gripping the club so tightly, and the Cyclops was not just attacking, but also defending himself with this hand. While he was screaming in pain, holding his hand, it was time to move away a little. I saw that the others were still fighting and were already finishing up, and Juho shouted at him to be careful. A huge Cyclops paw was just a moment away from grabbing him from behind. As soon as he lifted Kim Soo-hyun above him, he was very surprised that this Cyclops was still walking. It was not the hand in which he was holding the weapon, it was his other hand. Cyclops, not wanting to wait to see what he would do again, squeezed him tightly with both hands. The team turned around, and the fear was on their faces, because one of them had just died before their eyes. Yunmi screamed in agony that it was hopeless, and it was time to run, but her right hand stopped her. They were still looking at the Cyclops, whose hands were shaking violently. His hands unclenched, and Kim Soo-hyun jumped out of there like a bullet, using his jump ability. I was glad to get out, and realized that it was time to end the game, because it could have ended badly. I was also lucky enough to borrow the Cyclops' ability to regenerate from the Cyclops through transformation. The Cyclops' hands burned from this ability, and he even fell to one knee in pain, and Kim Soo-hyun landed on the ground. I looked at my hand and realized that the increase in the level of the transformation skill was worth it. Until now, he could only superficially copy the target's abilities, but now he could copy its full power. It even turned out to be stronger than I thought before, and I even thought about seeing where it could go. Juho came running to his aid to make sure he was okay. But Kim Soo-hyun was shot by a bullet, despite the fact that he was running toward him. He didn't have much to look at, as he had to save everyone by destroying the rest of the monsters. The monsters didn't even have time to realize what had happened. A sharp blade cut each of them. They hit the ground with no chance of survival after such blows. Moving as quickly as before, he found himself behind the Cyclops, shouting where he was looking. Juho watched the battle and saw how he instantly destroyed the whole group and attacked the Cyclops. He thought that such a speed of movement was incredible, and the fighting technique was also unbelievable, that it was a C-rank ability. Having noticed the monster sneaking up behind him in time, he was able to destroy it, which gave them confidence that they could do it all together. As he ran to Burun, he told her that he would take the front position and ordered her to support Min-seok and Yoon-si. Kim Soo-hyun saw that they were able to define their roles in the battle, so they began to work better together. So it was time to finish with his opponent and stop playing. Just as with the group of monsters, the blade passed through the body of the Cyclops a huge number of times and destroyed it. The team also ended up slaughtering monsters. Everyone was exhausted, but happy to have done it. Burun was drenched in sweat from the battle, and at times, she even thought that they were finished. Although they managed to defeat the monsters, they still did not know where the exit was, and if more appeared, nothing would change. Juho joined their conversation and said that he himself did not know what to do because it was the first time he had been in such a situation and did not think that there were any recommendations for such cases. Then I went up to Kim Soo-hyun and asked him if he was okay, wiping his sword and saying that he was not injured. Suddenly, he remembered what he was doing and that he was a C rank, but even though it was an emergency, he had clearly gone too far. Juho added that he felt his whole body trembling and aching. In this case, he called Yoon-si to fix it, and meanwhile, he and Barun would discuss matters. She asked him if he was injured, but heard that he was not, and she still thought it was necessary to use a healing spell, noting that he fought well. To think that he managed to destroy the Cyclops by himself, since even the B-ranked one couldn't do it. She had one more question for him, whether he was worried about it at all, and he asked if she meant the dungeon. This was also a question, but it was about these people who were with them. Yoon-si is afraid and unable to fight properly, while Min-seok continued to complain about another person about whom nothing is known, especially these two. She read that Abyss groups wrote that they abandoned people for rewards, and that even if they managed to finish the raid, the rewards could be smaller. Looking in the other direction, I began to guess what was really going on here. He told her not to worry, and that he understood everything, closed his eyes and smiled lightly. Then Juho came up and wanted to go over to talk to him about something, and Kim Soo-hyun agreed and actually wanted to ask him some questions himself, so it was good that he came up at the right time. Going further along the road, there were no more monsters, which could mean that they had dealt with all the monsters that were there. And the fact that they did not happen was a good sign, because they were safe until the next zone. Barun ran forward a little to ask Juho how he talked. Did you manage to find out anything, and did their plan continue to work? Closing his eyes and bursting forward, he told her that the plan was cancelled, and the whole detachment stood in front of a large iron door of such a size that it could indicate that something big was there. Kim Soo-hyun watched with everyone else as he realized that everything would be clear very soon. They entered the spacious hall, looking around the wide room for signs of danger. From all the signs of this place, Juho could assume that they were now in the center of the dungeon. At the other end of the room, there was another golden-colored door, which could have been the exit. Yoon-si went to the front. She didn't want to be there for a minute longer, only to be yelled at by the supervisor to stop. Her next move caused a screen to appear in front of them saying that the dungeon system was on. The system congratulated those who had come all this way, and the dungeon exam would soon begin. Kim Soo-hyun knew that starting from the yellow level, the raid could not end with the destruction of monsters, as there were tasks to be completed in the tower. Next, the system gave you 2 tasks to choose from. The first was to destroy the monsters that would arrive within 30 minutes, and the second was to run away from the monsters for 30 minutes. They were given 10 minutes to choose, and if they did not choose a path, it would be chosen automatically. This choice made them think, even though some of them shouted that the second option was better. However, if they chose the first option, the reward could have been much higher, and that's what they came for. Against this backdrop, a quarrel ensued, with the two accusing each other of being useless. Barun shouted at them to be quiet and think, as they had no time for quarrels, or simply did not interfere with the manager's choice. She came up to him and asked what they had time to do after all. The reason why they were able to survive and get here was Kim Soo-hyun, so it was better to ask him. Of course, Yunshi didn't like this, and didn't think it was the right choice for a C rank to be in command. Then he said that the best option would be to fight, and she was shocked. Then she screamed, accusing him of being greedy after he had destroyed the Cyclops, and such greed was unnecessary in this situation. Ignoring her, he explained that he wanted to get higher awards, so he had to think about it at first glance. Running was easier. However, if you think about it very carefully from the other side, you can come to a conclusion that when they run, they may be overtaken by the very monsters they cannot defeat. And they didn't know why they were waiting outside the door, so it might be more profitable to take a position here and fight. Juho scratched his beard and wondered if this was the best choice of all. Therefore, if no one was against it, you could choose the first option and draw a sword. When he ordered the formation, the system informed him that they had chosen the first option, battle with monsters, and that the battle would begin in 30 seconds. When the room was illuminated by a bright yellow beam, the system wished us good luck. The door through which they came opened, and various monsters began to appear. As soon as they appeared, they immediately started attacking. They seemed to be very fast. When one of them wrapped his long tongue around Juho's neck, Kim Soo-kang rushed in and saved him. And then he got ready to fight, just as the second monster was already in the air trying to attack. Everyone tried to fight to the best of their abilities to hold back the invasion. Even an unknown participant worked in a team with a doctor. Even Min-sok and his partner fought side by side, not letting up for a minute. Then a powerful blow to the ground scattered the creatures across the room. When the cloud of dust fell, Kim Soo-hyun looked around him, still waiting. What will happen next? What will the criminal do? Will he show his true face, or will he wait for everything to happen? In an instant, everyone's eyes were riveted on the golden door despite the battle. The doctor looked at her and almost cried. Her body was trembling with stress, and she even bit her finger. In the open doorway was their unknown comrade, who was pierced by sharp spears that appeared from the ground. There was fear in their faces, and a lot of questions about why he ran there and what happened. Juho shouted to everyone to get out and focus. The wave was not over yet. Suddenly, all the monsters began to disappear as if they were a computer program, turning into pixels. A screen popped up and warned me that the first path was forcibly closed, and they would start the second in 10 minutes. Yunshi was screaming what the hell had happened here. They had less than 5 minutes to get through. The doctor was crying because she didn't know how that person just ran away. Barun turned her head to Juho and asked if they had a chance to win, and he said it was not realistic. Because they had just heard that they were probably unrealistically strong against the people they were fighting, and because of the fight, their strength was no longer enough. She noted that if they run, there may be traps, and what then? Kim Soo-hyun interjected himself into the conversation because he thought there was nothing to worry about, so they had to leave. Min-sok was the first to yell what he was talking about, as usual, because he hadn't seen the body of that guy, so it was stupid to go there. Turning around, he calmly said that they really didn't know anything, that what the system said about the second path meant that monsters would run after them. It did not say that you need to avoid traps. The system does not lie. Maybe that guy was caught because he refused to take the chosen path and was punished. And anyway, they all have 3 minutes left, so wouldn't it be better to try to do something? Heeding the advice, Juho ordered them to get out of there in a serious tone, and if anyone had any objections, they could stay here. But he agreed with Kim Soo-ki, and it would be better to leave here, and if someone doesn't like something, he can then say that he is not worthy of being a leader. Yunshi scratched the back of her head and agreed. She didn't want to stay here alone, so staying in a group was the best option. So we had to hurry, as there was little time left before the doors closed, and the doctor asked if he was coming with them. But Kim Soo-kang, holding a weapon in his hands, said that he was staying here. The team wondered why he was doing this, or if he was even crazy about how he was supposed to defeat the monsters. They heard from him that he would do it, but he was not going to be left alone. He should take someone with him for their sake, and it was the right thing to ask Kim Yoon. He asked her to go with him, but she didn't want to because she was going to go with the others, so why should she stay? She saw the door closing behind her, so she had no way out. Barun shouted at him what the hell he was doing, what she had done to him, but asked him not to interrupt and that he would tell her later. She shouted for the leader not to close the door, as she did not want to stay here, begging him to take her with them, and Kim Soo-kang turned to Juho. I asked him if he had forgotten their conversation and what they had agreed on, and he said that he remembered. Kim Yoon's face was blank, and she was screaming not to be left here, but no one could hear her from behind the closed door. She fell to her knees crying, asking why he was doing this to her since they would not get out. She said that she wanted to live, and I am sure that he also had no reason to leave his life here. He waved his sword at her and offered to tell her about life after he took the dagger out of her hands and let her not even think that he didn't understand. Cutting open the shirt at the shoulder and exposing the sign, he continued to say that she shouldn't even pretend that she wasn't from the Dome Guild. The terrible Dome Crime Guild were the hotbed of all crimes. They were a crazy group and sowed a lot of evil in the future. Now, the name Dome is not very common in society, but in a couple of years, they will become a group that threatened humanity at the level of the end of the world. He knew that she was going to destroy the whole group to get the achievement that corresponded to her guild, and she believes that despite everything, she acted very reasonably and carefully. Yunshi was not very nice and was very worried about her life and thought about running away from the battle all the time, and her colleague wanted to clear the dungeon but had a lot of skills. But the mysterious man who remained because he was hiding his identity was the most suspicious, and for this reason, he became the first victim. And then she deliberately told them about the history of Juho and Baron, which should have made them suspicious. Therefore, all the reasons that were found out led to the conclusion that among them all, she was the criminal and turned out to be right. She got to her feet, smiled, and said that she had noticed when he was fighting the Cyclops and realized that he was impersonating someone else and was the real Kim Suk-heng. But then what is the point of his life remaining here when the monsters destroy it? She will open the door and escape. Since she possessed the invisibility skill and her class of doctor is lie, her skills are sharpened for destroying targets. She used her ability to hide from him and open the gate, then wished him good luck and disappeared from sight, and the system reported the opening of the second path. Kim Soo-hyun asked her if her ability could hide the smell of blood from his sword cut. As soon as she checked what he was talking about, monsters stood in front of her and were ready to tear her apart in a second. The last thing she saw before her death were 3 cyclopes and a scream that echoed throughout the room. And now that she was done, all that was left was to deal with this bunch of monsters who wanted to join the fight. He was not afraid of their number because it was a great opportunity to test himself and his skills. So I shouted to them to forgive me, but they will not get out of here alive. They will all be finished. Moving with lightning speed, it struck every creature on its way. Even flying monsters had nowhere to hide, and his sword was able to reach everyone in its path. When the winged man fell to the ground, he was able to look around a bit and assess the situation. As expected, there are a lot of them, and there is no end in sight, so there was still a lot of work to be done. However, I thought it was for the best, as it could have been the right moment for that technique. He raised his hand and shouted to them to let them attack, and he would destroy them with just one shot. Barun urged the group to run as fast as they could, because the monsters would catch them all at once. Then, Nu Ju-hoon asked if it was Kim Yoon who had dealt with that guy and asked how he knew about it. And I thought about the information I had received earlier when I left to talk to Kim Suk-hee. He then asked him if he really had a C rank because he had talked to Barun. She said that in order to defeat the Cyclops, you need to have great strength yourself. That's why he dared to think that he was looking at the real Kim Suk-heng from the rumors. And if that was the case, he asked to become the leader of the raid because he thought he was more suitable for this role than he was. So he asked me to give him an honest answer whether he was serious about his C rank. The answer was that his rank was such, and he was going to say so, and he was right about the real Kim Suk-heng being in front of him. Juho turned his head away because he had this feeling, and he was right. He asked why he was hiding his skills, and heard that it was for personal reasons. And looking at him, I said that he was someone I could trust, so I decided not to lie. He refused his request, so he had to remain the leader of the raid. This became clear after he tried to appoint him as leader, and when everyone was in danger, he was the one who managed to control everyone. He also added that he was a real leader, so he asked us to listen to his request, as he said he wanted to tell us about something. So he asked to listen and said, in short, that a criminal case would be opened against their group. He would explain everything briefly, but asked me to promise that he would take everyone out except him, because he would be left behind, since he had come only to catch the criminal. It was a memory of a conversation because I could not tell her everything while running, thinking about Kim Suk-hyeon's actions and possibly staying to buy time with my strength. Even if he could, the fact that there were a lot of monsters in the dungeon came to mind. I tried to drive away the thoughts, although I was very worried, but I could not do anything. In any case, I thought that it would only interfere. But he stopped abruptly, turned around, and shouted to himself that he couldn't do that. No matter how much I think about it, it's just not my place to leave him alone and just walk away. When I was banging on the door, I thought to myself that I was sorry that I could not fulfill his request and take everyone out. As soon as the door opened, I saw a bright blue fire burning there, all the monsters burning in it. Suddenly, with a scream, he looked up and saw one of the survivors flying at him. It was God's fire that burned demons and caused critical damage if the enemy had dark intentions. Juho stopped in time to notice that it was him and was very surprised to see him. But there was no time to talk. The monsters were still advancing, and we had to continue to finish them off. Juho was at a loss for words. He opened his mouth and watched what was happening like a small child. He watched as he swung his sword and shook off the blood that remained of the creatures. When I was sure that there were no more monsters, I decided to run up and ask. But Kim Soo-hyun was the first to start the conversation, asking him why he came back, and he received the answer that his conscience did not allow him to do otherwise. Scratching the back of his head, he said that he ran here like a scalded man and managed to kill everyone and didn't even manage to help. But he denied that he was, and it was good that he came back because his help would be needed. Because it was just beginning, a yellow portal appeared and lit up the entire room. Finally, this moment has come as the final boss has appeared and needs to be defeated to end the raid. Juho pointed and asked what it was. Kim Suk-hyun repeated that he had already said that it was the final boss of this dungeon. It was a shock for him because he didn't know that there were bosses who looked like skeletons. And when he heard that and asked him not to call it that, it was very rude. He asked to be called normally when he was addressed, and not with such a derogatory word as skeleton, because he had his own name, which sounded like Lich of the Dark Priest, and it was his real name. But he didn't finish because Kim Soo-hyun shouted at him not to try to be cool because he was only half a leech. And he told Juho the same thing, that this thing was not a lich, and in fact it almost became one, but a real lich is different in terms of mana and concentration. The creature exhaled and warned in a rude tone that such trifles would not work on him. After a flurry of insults, he stood up and threatened to tear off all their limbs and feed them to monsters. Then the monsters that had already been defeated began to stand up one by one. There were a lot of them. They were everywhere, all of whom Kim Soo-kang defeated could fight again. Having realistically assessed the circumstances, I was convinced that it was Lich, albeit half of him, and that he had the ability to perform necromancy. This explained why the dungeon changed color from orange to yellow. Juho shouted out why he was teasing him in such a way that he didn't have to, but he heard that it was on purpose. Since this was the only way to provoke him to attack them, he lit the sword with flames. Then he lowered the blade to the floor and began to run around it, and the fire followed. Thus, forming a circle around them, I addressed him, although I did not want to say it to him. He said that at that moment he was not strong enough to fight the monsters, so he would be in the way, and it was difficult to fight and protect at the same time, and Juho understood that too. Kim Soo-hyun added that he had nothing to worry about, as the undead would not be able to cross the circle, so his task was to distract them, so that they would not interfere with dealing with the real enemy hovering in the air above them. After activating the ability, he jumped into the attack, quickly approaching Lich's half. But something strange happened. The sword missed its target and landed on the wall on the other side. He appreciated it, emphasizing that as a human, he was quite fast, but it was not enough to reach him. Kim Soo-hyun thought that usually Lich didn't have the skills for physical combat and used the undead to avoid physical attacks. And all this was necessary to hide their greatest weakness, the crystal of life on their foreheads, which served as a source of their strength. Teleportation skills were also developed because it was necessary to keep a distance from the enemy, but still need to catch him in order to destroy him. Again, he approached and swung his sword, but the attack passed by, and again, it was in vain. Although the attack was unsuccessful, they managed to find out that Lich was using the cloak to create a blind spot. Suddenly, not wanting to just defend himself and avoid attacks, he decided to attack with magic himself. Because of this turn, I decided to activate the Flame of God and direct it at him. He managed to stay at the height of the wall and wondered whether he had managed to hit it. As soon as the dust settled, Lich said that the Flames of God could have easily killed him. Laughing, he shouted that it was all useless until he could hit it. Hanging from the ceiling, I was already confused because I thought I had hit it, but as it turned out, it was difficult to hit a moving target. Lich was looking at him, and it was funny to him to watch him while he was hanging there and thinking, but he thought it was good that he was thinking about it. And before continuing the duel, he asked to see his sword. His magic can destroy everything it touches, and it is now slowly eating away at his sword, with 5 minutes left before it is completely destroyed. Kim Soo-hyun shouted that he was afraid, but that it would be over in 5 minutes. Juho watched the fight and was very emotional. Even his face was tense. Looking at the pile of monsters behind the walls of fire, he set himself up for action, since he did not come here to be defended. But I was very worried that if he tried to do something, he might interfere with Kim Soo-kang. In addition, there was a very high chance that he could have said goodbye to his life before he even had time to do anything. However, sitting idly by was an even worse option. And most importantly, it was not in his style to jump up and swing his sword. He hit one of the monsters in the back, and it roared in pain, and blood sprinkled the ground. Despite the hellish fight with Lich, Kim Suk-heng noticed that Juho had gone into battle. He fought outside of God's fire, and not just fought, but used fire as a weapon. I also clearly saw that his mana level increased after entering the dungeon, and it was amazing that he managed to become stronger in such a short time. And if it was true, it was just great, then we had to change our plans. Approaching the leader on the way, he destroyed a couple more monsters with powerful sword blows. He landed on the ground, and the monsters that were standing 1 second later were already lying on the floor with no way to survive again. He turned to Lich and said that he did not even dare to think that he was running away. This was the beginning of their fight. Then he turned to Juho and said that he wanted to apologize to him for what he had said earlier. Because he was wrong about him being weak, he suggested that we deal with all the monsters first and then. He didn't even have the words to say how to bring down this annoying skeleton together. Lich laughed and shouted why he was so confident and that nothing would change if there were 2 of them. After discussing the plan of action, they looked at the skeleton, and Juho asked if it was possible to do it, and Kim Soo-hyun said that it was certainly possible. Not being completely sure of the plan, but being confident in it, I believed that they would succeed. He grabbed his sword and said that he understood everything and would try not to interfere. Lich called her fools, pointed his finger at them, and ordered the rest of the undead to attack. Not wanting to just wait for them, the 2 grabbed their swords and ran to the meeting. Raising his sword up, he struck the ground with all his strength so that the shockwave would scatter the trees. It was also a maneuver to distract all the monsters, while Juho tries to attack Lich. He was only more curious that this time they switched, but he could see that this one was weaker than the other. At this time, downstairs, Kim Soo-hyun again used the God's Flame magic to direct it to his sword, to then swing the sword and direct fire at Lich with more speed than a hand. He even appreciated the double attack, but laughed at them and kept saying that they would not succeed. Juho began to twirl his sword in the storm to activate the ability, Wind Dance, and pointed the blade toward the enemy to direct the vortex, which united with the divine flame, and this increased both the speed and power of the blow. Leech barely had time to realize what they had done and was already preparing to run away. But because of this combination in speed, it was impossible to escape, and the combined attack hit. Kim Soo-hyun quickly ran to catch Juho falling from the top. He put his sword over his head to make a landing pad. Then he used the sword jump ability to push the leader right back at Lich. But this time he had no intention of falling for their tricks and missing the shot again. And while the skeleton was attacking Juho, it allowed Kim Soo-hyun to sneak in from behind. He only noticed that he was surrounded after being told that now he would be finished. When he attacked, the sword split into small pieces and the hood exposed his skull. The shocked Leech opened his jaw and looked very frightened. And when he realized that he was alive, he started laughing even harder than before and said that he had forgotten that the sword was cursed and how he could fight without a weapon. But Kim Soo-hyun smiled because no one said that only he could have the sword. Leech had forgotten about Juho, distracted by another player, and there were only a few meters left to strike. The sword passed straight down the center of the skeleton's head, leaving a barely noticeable stripe. He hung in the air with his jaw open, and his stone of life was destroyed with him. It fell to the ground with a noise, creating a column of dust and a shockwave. When they started the fight, he thought that he would use Juho as a distraction, so he focused on him, and maybe he even thought he could win. But when we discussed the plan, we decided that Juho would be the one to destroy it. So, having thought it through, Lich tried to get up, whispering that it was not over yet. Before he dispersed, he told them that when the sun went down into darkness, their king would rise again, and he will bring torment on them. Juho looked at them with a tired look and asked if it was already over. Kim Soo-hyun said yes, but he was thinking about his last words, which were quite disturbing. Completely exhausted, they barely got out of there and hid in the bushes to watch. As the rescue team and a team of medical professionals examined the participants of the raid, Chukun wondered why they were here. Even journalists came and interviewed Barun, asking uncomfortable questions, asking where her colleague was. Hiding behind a handkerchief, she began to cry, as she did not know how, and hoped that he had made it out alive. Juho smiled because his colleague was nervous enough to call a rescue team, but it could have been bad for them, because he realized that Kim Soo-kyung did not want anyone to know the truth about him, that he was real. He knew that sooner or later it would happen, but he didn't want to face it now. Then Juho stood up and said he would go there alone, as he was quite good at handling such situations. Until now, he had been constantly dealing with Barun's problems, but he had one condition for silence. And he got the part of the reward that he had given him earlier and would like to give it back. That many stones would cost him several million won, and it was hard for him to accept such a gift. However, Juho noted that he still earns a good living and was not going to take it anyway because he did not think he deserved it. Kim Soo-hyun asked him why he decided to do this, and he explained that they were able to defeat Leech only because of his wit and skills, and the help and experience he received are much more valuable than that. And I'm sure that if I wanted to, I could have handled Lich without his help, but I still allowed him to fight alongside me because I wanted to help him with his development. I insisted that he take it away, and asked him to leave while he was dealing with their little problem. He had to have something to hail a taxi to the nearest road, and it was fortunate that he knew a driver named Yong-hun. When the sun was almost down, Kim Soo-hyun was riding in a taxi toward home. I never even thought that the taxi driver would drive all the way to the mountains, but I did know some good people in Juho. In any case, although they managed to catch the criminal and survive the raid, they could not save everyone. The only reason they were able to save anyone was because of Lee Juho's help. Without him, it would have been very difficult to do it alone. Squeezing my hand into a fist, I thought that this was just a confirmation that I needed to become much stronger. I also thought that his past was very strong if he was left alone when everyone fell. Even if it was true, it turned out to be not enough. Therefore, in order to change the future, you need to become strong quickly and consistently be able to bring reliable people to your side. But first of all, I had to think about myself, as my fatigue level was quite high. But first, we had to start with something bigger and try to make money and change. In one of the offices, a secretary came into the office of the head of the Ethereal Stones Department, Lee Kajin, and told him that someone wanted to sell the stones. When the manager looked at the tablet, he couldn't understand why the assistant was so worried. And he said that the reason for the excitement was that the guy had brought more than 500 grams of ethereal stones with him, and his boss's mouth dropped open. Kim Soo-hyun sat waiting in the office hallway until his boss came to him and apologized for the wait. He shook hands and said that he was very pleased to meet him. His name was Lee Kangjin, and he was the head of the auction house of ethereal stones. He sat down and continued the conversation, and he felt that he didn't have many ethereal stones with him. Taking one with tweezers, he examined it closely and determined that it was of impeccable quality. He knew well that such stones could only be found in yellow dungeons, so he asked if they were legal. And not that he suspected him, but as far as he knew, he had only a C rank. So it seemed strange that he had such ethereal stones that could only be found in yellow or higher dungeons. Kim Soo-hyun realized that the two were trying to lower the price and told him that he just considered himself lucky because he was able to get something. As a reward for the dungeon, he put a stone on their pillow, which made their eyes crawl to their foreheads. It was an etheric stone of the highest level with the property of the crystal of life. Few people knew that the crystal was a valuable stone. It needed to be destroyed to destroy it, but the chance that it will drop as a reward for the dungeon is very low. He couldn't even hope for such luck, so if they were in doubt, it was time to leave. But Lee Kejun snatched him up and asked him to wait a bit longer. And why not calm down and discuss it again? But I noticed that my hands were empty. He opened his hands and saw that the stone had disappeared from his palms, looking to the side. I saw the guy throwing him up the hill in one step before he left the office. He stopped and warned me that he had heard the price they were going to offer only once. When I left the office, I looked at my phone and saw that 600 million won had been credited to my account, which was a very good amount of money for them. However, on reflection, this will become nothing when a disaster strikes. But now I have to use it, and I didn't think that I would have any problems with money in the near future. Besides all this, he was very happy that he no longer needed financial assistance from his mother. When I entered the apartment, I met my mother, who was very excited to finally see her son. She was very happy and relieved that he had returned, but Kim Soo-yoon saw a bruise on his cheek. She welcomed him back and said that he should have told her that he was coming and that dinner was not yet ready. He took another good look and said that her face had become very thin and asked about the bruise on her cheek. My mom smiled and asked me not to worry, as nothing terrible had happened, and besides, he knew where she worked, so he got it when she was breaking up people. He couldn't stand it any longer and shouted at her why she continued to work there. It was enough to go where she could get hurt. Not knowing what he was talking about, she took his hands and said that he was going to college soon, and she needed to pay for his education. She realized that she could not provide him with a good place to live, but she wanted to help as much as she could. And yet she has always been proud of him, so she wants him to be proud of her. Kim Soo-hyun stood there, not knowing what her words had said that could reach his heart. He remembered how his mother used to yell at him for not becoming the greatest awakened one with such mania. She told me to always try harder, because everyone should be proud of him. She always said that his main goal was to become a hero. While he was stuck in his thoughts, he only managed to hear his mother calling him a few times. He turned to his mother in a calm tone because he had something to tell her. They sat down at the table opposite each other and made themselves a hot glass of tea. The mother was frozen by the information that her son was awakened, just like those on TV. He replied that he was well respected in the community and could earn as much as they did, so he planned to work as an awakened man and not go to college. I apologized because I should have told her everything earlier and didn't want to hide it from her. His mother calmed down a bit, smiled a little, and asked him if he really wanted to do this not because of money and respect, but because of desire. Remembering all the destruction, he bowed his head and said that he wanted it so badly. This answer made her feel better, and she exhaled and said that if this was the case, everything was fine. He thought that she would be angry about it, but to make sure, he asked her if she was not. Because I thought there would be a bad reaction, I hid it from her for more than a year, and it's also a dangerous job. I thought she would be angry and worried, but my mom interrupted me and said that she was worried about him. But knowing that he had been hiding it from her for a year, he realizes that he can't convince her with a simple shout, and she doesn't want to forcefully change his life. She understands everything and wants him to make his own decisions and be happy. But she had one request. She asked him to tell her everything that worried him. He replied that he agreed to such conditions and was very grateful to her for everything. He asked her to listen for a minute because he had already managed to earn a little money while awake and thought it would be enough for her to quit her job. When she gave her the phone with a 600 million won transfer, her mother froze. The whole house could hear her screaming with joy. She could not believe what she was seeing and that they had become rich in such a short time. She threw the phone back to him and said that she needed to cook something for dinner, so she asked him to wait. My mom asked if he wanted something special, but Kim Soo-yoon kept quiet and just smiled. He had been dreaming of this warming atmosphere for a very long time, which had never been there before. At times, I was so glad that I was thinking about giving up everything and living such a quiet life. However, I realized that he was not the real Kim Soo-kang who was supposed to live here, and this warmth was supposed to be his. But on the other hand, he didn't care much, because he was given a second chance to save the world. Therefore, he appealed to the real Kim Soo-keon when he returns to this body, wanting him to continue to protect everyone and not to lose his mother. To do this, he intended to turn him into a hero. To do this, he had to become stronger because he was still weak. Most likely, we need to climb the tower again, and for this we needed weapons, not this junk we received from the authorities. This meant that it was time to hear the whimsical voice I had heard so long ago again. In a forge, a blacksmith forged a sword blade by hitting it with a hammer. After forging and tempering the steel, the man looked at his product. His name was Blacksmith Kim Dae-ho. He was distracted from admiring his craft by a knock on the door and a voice asking if anyone was there. Not wanting to open it, he put the blade back on the anvil and began to hammer on it with a hammer, making loud sounds. But no matter how many times he knocked, the voice did not disappear, and he opened the door and shouted out who was disturbing him. Kim Soo-kang smiled and said he was very pleased to meet him. Kaval did not understand who this guy was and why he came to him. The Holy Sword, Balmung, is the second name of the Holy Sword of the Dragon Slayer, and it was borrowed from the sword used by Siegfried. and it was this sword that he used in his past life when his name was Kim Seong-in. The greatest sword is created from an infinite amount of rare materials and the efforts of the awakened ones. In the past, he also had to visit Balmung's creator, blacksmith Kim Dae-ho. He remembered as clearly as now that when he entered, the blacksmith was sitting in front of the furnace, forging iron. And his visit was related to the creation of one item that he ordered, and Kim Dae-ho said that the order was finished. The sword was on the anvil. Its beauty was magnificent. It was one of the greatest masterpieces he had ever created. But then, for reasons of conscience, he could not accept it, because he knew what he had gone through in creating the sword. The materials he chose to create the greatest masterpiece of all time were spent on him, because how dare he take him away, and he has never paid for his work since they have known each other. Moreover, the valuable materials he spent on creating the sword did not allow him to even touch it. The blacksmith waited for the boy to finish his speech and said that he had noticed that he was called a hero, despite the fact that he rarely left the forge. However, I noticed that the more famous he became, the more exhausted he became. I asked him if it didn't seem unfair to him that people around the world expected a lot from him, even though they gave nothing in return. But I thought that I still had to meet their expectations because I was the only one capable of doing so I did not act fairly, wielding the sword to keep things fair. Just as people expect him to do something for free, he can do something for free, and in general, he is the only one capable of creating such weapons. Kim Dae-ho was a master craftsman and his savior, and also one of those who failed to be protected in his past life. A lot of time passed, and this time he had to protect him, but after finishing with his memories, he introduced himself to the blacksmith as Kim Soo-hyun. Koval said he had never heard the name and asked if he was an important person and how he had found it. When he said that he had heard that the blacksmith was making weapons for the awakened, he started screaming. After closing the door, he shouted that it was complete nonsense and that he had not made any weapons at all. While standing in front of the door, I noticed that Kim Dae-ho had not changed at all and said that he had prepared materials for weapons. It was the door that worked, and he looked out as if he had to at least look at it. As soon as Kim Soo-hyun opened the tablecloth, there were stones, and the blacksmith was immediately shocked. They were purple-colored ethereal stones, and also of the highest quality. This ethereal stone was another reward for the destruction of Lich, and it was believed that this item was almost impossible to obtain. It was only after the breakthrough of the Gwangju dungeon that the world learned that higher-level ethereal stones could be obtained as a reward for dungeons. There were many uses for ethereal stones, although its greatest value was in the creation of weapons. The blacksmith holding it in his hands asked where he had gotten it from, but wondered if it was important to know. But of course, it was not important to him. So he asked what he wanted him to do, and the answer was that he needed a great sword. When we went inside, Kim Dae-ho admitted that he thought he was nothing, but he saw that he knew his business and came to the right place. Therefore, we need to take a closer look at the contract. But Kim Soo-kang said that he did not need to. Koval asked him if he even realized how valuable the material he had brought was, and he said yes. With a confident look, he assured me that he fully trusted the owner. And he knows that he is attracted to the process of creating a sword using an ethereal stone, not the sword itself. With his arms at his sides, blacksmith Kim Dae-ho's laughing laughter echoed throughout the forge. He appreciated that he was looking at an interesting guy and liked it. It was very good, and he will take this order and make a sword for him in the appropriate material. After saying thank you, Kim Soo-kang reached out his hand to seal the deal. As soon as they shook hands, he said that he had great faith and trust in him. It will take a long time to finish it, and if he needs weapons right now, he offered to take whatever he needs from his own stocks. Leaving the house, he closed the door. It was already evening outside. Going in, he thought that the manufacturing process would take about 10 months, but it took longer than he thought. However, the weapon he chose was also very good, as expected from the master Kim Dae-ho. Now all that was left was to go only forward until the power increased, and he entered the abyss. Once again, I hit the spot in front of the male goalkeeper. The goalkeeper looked at him as he entered, and the system informed him that the test of the 11th floor was beginning. The next day, when I said goodbye to my mother, I went back to the abyss on the 12th floor. It didn't take long for him to draw the attention of the awakened ones to himself again, passing level after level. The enemies and trials were worthy, but the thirst for power was greater. The 15th and 16th floors passed unnoticed. Even giant monsters could not stand it and were destroyed by his sword. His goal was to get to the 20th floor, and it's been 6 months now. While in the hospital, Barun argued with Juho because his treatment was supposed to take 6 weeks, and she asked him to take care of himself. He told her that he was challenging the tower again, this time raising the difficulty level to 5th, and asked if it was too hard. Smiling, he closed his eyes and said that he could not give up just because of some difficulty, and he will never be able to catch up with Kim Soo-kyan if he feels sorry for himself. Then, their conversation was interrupted by a phone call that rang throughout the ward. When he picked up the phone, he was very surprised by who was calling him. When he picked up the phone, Kim Soo-hyun said hello and was very happy to hear from him, as it had been a long time. And if he was fine, I wanted to ask him for one favor, of course, if it was convenient for him. During the phone conversation, I asked Juho for 3 things. First, to find a good apartment for the awakened one near Seoul. After handing over the store to his mom, he needed a good place to move to, and the second thing he wanted to do was learn as much as possible about the Dome Guild. They might have heard about the Gwangju dungeon, but Kim Yoon was the lowest of the guild, and they still wondered what happened to her. But he was afraid that it would be difficult to track them, and Juho agreed without a second thought. He explained that he couldn't take care of it at the moment, and that he understood everything, so he asked me to rely on him. And finally, the third thing shocked him because he said that on December 24th, there would be a huge outbreak. As far as he knows, there should have been about 10,000 victims, and this will be the greatest tragedy in history. Juho wondered how he knew this information, but he couldn't tell him right now. Kim Soo-hyun understood that he was asking for a lot, and if he thought this request was too unpleasant, he would simply refuse. He told him all this only because he hoped he would believe him. After a second delay, he said that he would still do everything in his power. Glad that Juho heard him and accepted his request, he relied on him with a calm soul. The last thing he asked for was to help him in the upcoming tragedy in the Dungeon of Onion, so I was less than 6 months away from Christmas. Therefore, he needs to become stronger and is happy that he will receive the ordered weapon from the owner Kim Dae-ho as soon as he clears the 19th floor of the tower. He will be ready to meet the outbreak, but before that, he needs to try to clear the 19th floor perfectly. The system greeted him and informed him that he had entered the 19th floor of the exam tower. In the desert, there was a skeleton of some large creature, and in it you could see many small spots that moved. The system reported that he had been transferred to a rat's den with the task of surviving falling on them and was alarmed by their number. As soon as he landed, he got to his feet and looked at the rats that had noticed his appearance. It was obvious from the skeleton that they had been able to chew it up for a long time, and they were probably hungry. Pulling out the sword, I thought that now they looked at him as their food. Small rats were a very easy target and not difficult to kill. The jump ability worked well against them, allowing them to move quickly forward, scattering them in all directions. Suddenly, one of the rats jumped up and managed to reach my shoulder and duck further. Such a breakthrough meant that I had to be more focused because the rats had either poison or acid. It will still be a problem if they bite, so I had no time to play games and burn the attacking rats with holy fire. I leaned on one of the skeleton's ribs and watched them burn, and thought that they did not pose a threat individually, but there were a lot of them. But if he continued to use the flame, he would spend a lot of mana, and it was not known what would happen next, so the task was to deal with them all at once. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by the rats avoiding the fire and quickly approaching it. Because of their invasions, there was no time to even think about sending the rat to the other side with a strong kick. I managed to slide down and knock down all the annoying rats that were on it. While flying to the ground, I managed to see one interesting thing that caught my eye. There was a hole in the ground in front of him with cracks coming out of it, which could mean that there could be a void there. He thought that he had come up with a plan, and then he waved his sword and set it on fire with holy flames. He threw it down so that it got stuck in the ground and kicked it from the top, thus creating even bigger cracks. He managed to get rid of the rats in this way, but he himself fell into the void underground. Looking around, I realized that I was right, but it looked like the real test was starting here. One of the rats managed to survive and crawl out of the wreckage. Kim Soo-kang looked at him, but he did not attack. She abruptly started running away, which meant she was afraid, and the question was what, exactly? Running away, I put my paw on the stone, and it dropped like a button, even with such a small weight. Instantly, spears popped up and pierced her, and Kim Soo-hyun managed to find out that there were traps. Suddenly, there was a roar and noise from all sides, and the ground under my feet began to tremble. A large snake's head appeared in front of him, and he knew that rats were not all. Looking at the creature, I thought that my guesses were right, but now there were many problems. The snake attacked first with a flick of its tail and hit the ground, but I was able to dodge it because of my good reaction, and immediately try to attack it before it attacks. It was hard to believe, but even the sword of Master Kim Dae-ho did not work, showing strong resistance to physical harm. If it was not possible to break through with force, it was time to use magic and direct the flames of God directly into the mouth. When I jumped to the ground and looked at the snake, sweat was on my cheek and a question was in my head. It was not so useless. The creature was not only physically strong, but it also meant a strong resistance to magic, and it made no sense to use the god's flame. The snake attacked not only with its tail, but also with its snout, which caused even more problems. They were faster and more powerful, and it was harder to run away from them. But she still managed to combine them, barely managing to escape one blow, as the second one was just tailing him. This time, I used a jump to blow myself up, as it was the only way out. Suddenly, her mouth was behind him, and only by sensation did he manage to turn around and insert his sword into her mouth. The creature was faster than he could have thought before, and fought well to get rid of him, sending him into the wall. Thus, she managed to get it out of her mouth and cause damage. Despite its large size, the snake was very agile. If this battle had taken place a month ago, such an opponent would not have been victorious. But now, even such a huge snake was not an opponent for him, although it did not give up, trying to destroy the stranger who entered its territory. Kim Soo-hyun realized that he had half as much mana left as after a normal battle and wondered how it would end. I had to immobilize her and sharply headed for her muzzle. He used it as a springboard to jump up to the top. Grabbing a vine, he began to run along the walls to escape the attacks. This made it possible for the trick, since no matter what level of magic he had, it would hurt if he got here. The blow was really powerful, and she was thrown against the wall and could be seen wrapped in vines in some places, but it could still move its tail, even though it was so high up that such a blow could have hit it. Somehow, I managed to avoid it as it missed me by a few centimeters. These circumstances also turned out to be a great moment to try to hurt her again. The sword slid down the body of the snake, leaving a line from the divine flame. Before landing, he hit a ledge hard and fell to the ground. Rising to his elbow, he felt the pain piercing his body. The fall was really hard. The snake also wanted to take advantage of the moment when he was barely moving and deal with him in one fell swoop. But with the help of vines and cunning, he thought of a plan to catch her. All she had to do was hover and hiss helplessly at her target, which was the only way to deal with a monster that had physical magic resistance and regeneration. But even so, he told the snake that it could not win because it had a more destructive power. After I raised my hand up and directed the flame there, a bird of God appeared. God's flame. Phoenix is one of the types of God's flame summoning. He managed to get this skill on the 18th floor when the skill level increased. It was not a simple skill at all, but thanks to it, you can summon a beast to which you can give orders and control it. However, the downside was that it consumed more mana than he could have thought, but the result was worth it. The destructive power of this phoenix is 10 times greater than the power of God's own flame. The bird was quickly heading toward the snake, which hissed as if it sensed its imminent end. He managed to stitch it through, leaving a huge hole. The bird came back and sat on his hand, and the system reported that he had completed 100% of the achievements and finished the 19th floor. The complexity of the exam tower increases every 10 levels, just like last time on the 10th level. This time on the 20th, it will not be easy. That's why I did everything I could to prepare for it over the past 6 months. Now there was only one thing left, the sword he had been waiting for. In front of a bulletin board that said Kim Suk-heng had won again, people were vigorously discussing it, even thinking that he was not human. Even on the internet, it was written that he managed to break 9 records and ignored all attempts by associations to contact him and did not respond to guild invitations. While sitting in a coffee shop, Juho noticed a luxury car pull up. Kim Soo-hyun came out of it wearing new clothes, and people did not take their eyes off him or the car. Juho came out, and they greeted each other, and were happy to see each other. With a strange expression on his face, he asked me if I liked the car he gave me. He said it was a little bit because of the rat, but Juho denied it because when he found out what he was driving, he was shocked. After all, the awakened man had many places to visit and added that this car had an 8 engine. When we went inside and sat down, I asked him how he was preparing for the 20th floor. He replied that he was fine, but that he was postponing the entrance because he was waiting for one thing and that he was supposed to pick it up today. He also thanked him for stopping by his house and his mom's store, but he was only too happy to help. Moving on to business, Juho said that he managed to organize a meeting with the director of an agency next month and that they might be able to help. I looked away and thought that in the next place it was going to be before the outbreak 2 months ago. It sounded so-so. There was also a question about the Garbage Collectors Guild, and that was the next thing he had to tell us. I asked everyone, but I never got an answer. It seemed to me that they were hiding very well. But I found out that the destruction and disappearance of the Awakened had increased due to the recent increase in the water table. So there is nothing to be done with this information. But I have found cases where the Awakened were left alive right in the middle of the streets. And after the investigation, it turned out that these awakened people had been poisoned. The first thing that came to mind was how the head of the guild, Ares, destroyed that guy with just one touch. He asked me to find out more because he didn't like such cases in general. As soon as they finished talking, Juho wished them a safe trip, and to see them soon, Kim Soo-hyun left and headed for his car. With only 3 months to go before the outbreak in Anyang, Juho tried his best, but nothing was coming of it, so the best way to deal with it was to get involved personally. I was waiting for him in the blacksmith's workshop and meanwhile examined his weapons. Kim Dae-ho came into the room with something rolled up in his hands and apologized for the weight. It was hard to handle the material, but he liked working with it and guaranteed its strength, so he just had to take a look. When he opened it, he could not take his eyes off it, thinking that it was exactly the same as it was then. He was very kind, but even without picking it up, he realized that it was exactly the sword he needed, that it was alive. Then he grabbed the sword he had borrowed earlier and took it outside. He threw it up so sharply that it started spinning in the air. And then he held up a new sword and pointed it at the place where the old one should have fallen, and when they touched, it shattered into pieces. The sharpness and durability are just perfect. It responds to his mana and understands what to cut and what not. It was a great sword, even smiled at how great the result was. After taking a drag of his cigarette, the blacksmith asked him if he had already come up with a name for the weapon. Kim Soo-hyun thought about it for a while and said the word Gram with the sword that slayed the dragons. Kim Dae-ho didn't understand what grams he was talking about. He asked if it was 100 grams or 200 grams. He didn't understand what he was talking about. Gram is an alternative name for Balmung in Northern Europe and could not call him that again, but did not want to give up the name of the destroyer of the gods. As soon as he left the forge, he said he was leaving, but Kim Dae-ho stopped him and offered to at least drink tea, and although it was very kind, he had things to do. Night descended on the castle, and only the burning torches provided light around. Inside, a soldier in uniform was wandering around, doing his duty to keep the peace. Suddenly, Commander Maxman came to his post and realized that the soldier was scared because of his appearance, so he tried to calm him down by asking if everything was okay in the outfit. He understood that his subordinate was tired because of the succession of shifts, but he asked him to stay a little longer. The castle would be in danger if Odrum invaded. I looked out the window and saw the moon rising, shining its light inside, and thought that half a month had passed at this pace. We had to figure out what to do next, and suddenly someone came up behind us and asked if he had any problems. I turned my head and saw one person, but I had to greet him and wish him a good evening. In front of him stood a man in a dark cloak with a dark-colored hat and a mask on his face. It was Atake. The commander asked him why he was here and if he hadn't gone to help the king, and he answered that he was here to make sure they were guarding the place well. Maxman said that they had gathered all the troops in the fortress, but the situation was still not pleasant because the enemy army was larger, so if necessary, they would have to leave it. Atake came closer and asked him menacingly if he had heard correctly about the retreat from the fortress. The commander stepped back and explained that he meant such actions under normal circumstances if they were to lose. But he had his own opinion that this could not be allowed and that it was better to die together than to abandon this fortress. Such words were outrageous, and I thought he shouldn't say such things because he doesn't take part in battles. After the announcement of the attack of the kingdom of Odrum, this man was a first-class follower of the king and became the commander-in-chief. Complete obedience to the orders of the leaders is the duty of a soldier on the battlefield, but this man believed that the life of a soldier was equivalent to the life of ants. How could the king appoint such a man as commander-in-chief, he said, saying that in any case, these talks were useless for another month. Wasn't that enough for the hero of the kingdom, Commander Maxman? He shouted in their wake, even if they lasted as long as they did, nothing would change. Suddenly, they heard a roar, and the ground began to shake under their feet. They did not realize what was happening. A private came running and said that they were in trouble, that an unexpected external attack had recently taken place, and the gates of the fortress were destroyed by one incredible boy. A few hours ago, in front of the gate of the 20th floor of the exam tower, Kim Soo-hyun approached the goalkeeper who was sitting in front of the entrance and was happy to see him. It was very rare for him to meet a rich man like him, here in fashionable clothes and with such interesting weapons. The gatekeeper asked him if he had come for help, and he answered yes, and immediately asked if he could have it, and he showed that he wanted money. Kim Soo-hyun mentioned that the higher the floor was, the heavier the goalkeepers became. In order to close all the questions at once, he said he would give 10,000 points, and thought it would be enough. It made the man laugh so much that he laughed non-stop and could not calm down. He laughed because it was calculated with so many points that it took ordinary people 10 years to save up. So he asked what exactly he needed. Kim Soo-hyun said he wanted to try the 10th level of difficulty, which he had to be careful of. The first thing he said was not to worry about him, because he could destroy anyone he wanted. If possible, no one should be left alive, and under any circumstances, so that he was sure what he was doing. For 10,000 points, he didn't like the clues, but the goalkeeper pushed him in the back to go try. Looking back, I thought that this time they always said something vague as well. Although it may help to some extent, it was his job. After the spot under his feet, he felt that he had fallen and started to fall. In time, some objects began to appear and a branch came up to grab onto. As a result, the speed of the fall decreased and he managed to land without any injuries. After examining the area, he saw a well-fortified fortress from the cliff in front of him. The screen came up and said that the 20th floor begins with a test of the 10th level of difficulty. The fortress of the Kingdom of Grandolum was a fortress with iron walls and thousands of soldiers. But it was said that they were not his enemies during the test. He could even save his comrades. He had to reveal the secrets of the castle and survive. This time, the explanation was longer than usual, but the longer the more conclusions can be drawn. The system asked to capture the fortress and reveal the secrets. So the goal of the test was not to win the siege, but the question was how to capture it without battles. Waiting until nightfall, I lit a fire and looked at the diagram for a long time, wondering how to act. The walls are so thick that it is not an exaggeration to call them iron. The level of soldiers was also high, and there were many who possessed magic. And in general, the situation pulled us to the C rank when it was weaker in terms of numbers and position because it was impossible to capture and destroy anyone and still reveal the secret. The deadline was 1 month, and although there was a lot of time and no freedom of action, I decided to go ahead. The guards were alerted when he approached them and asked who he was. When he approached and greeted me, he called himself a simple traveler who had lost his way and asked if he could stay in the fortress for a while. They called him crazy, shouted at him what kingdom he was from, and asked if he could see that martial law was in effect. With 2 months to go before the outbreak, he has to overcome the ordeal as soon as possible and return to be fully armed. I ducked down and reached for my sword if there was no other way out. I needed strength. He apologized, shouted that in that case he would enter by force and jumped over them. At that moment, he swung his sword and struck with such force that he cut through the wall. When the gates fell, soldiers were already waiting behind them, ready to defend the fortress. Kim Soo-hyun looked at the gram and looked at it for a long time while there was a commotion around him, realizing that the more he used it, the more he saw. that this sword was indeed the same glorified sword and resonates with it, and through it can safely adjust the sharpness of the blade. He ran sharply in front, scattering the guards to the right and left. He turned his head to make sure they weren't following him, and he succeeded. There was nothing that this sword could not cut, and at the same time, I bet that it did not cut anything. On the second line of defense were archers, who had the intruder in their sights. They did not wait a second and fired arrows at him, not knowing that he would easily deflect them. To prevent them from harming him, it is necessary to deal with them. I pushed the first rifleman commander to stop commanding and shouting. He looked down to make sure he was okay, and heard him moaning in pain. Suddenly, I heard an incomprehensible commotion and screams coming from behind me. It was clear that they were holding back some man who was ordering everyone to retreat, and that he would be his opponent. The soldiers surrendered him, calling him a commander, but something strange was going on. The soldiers focused on protecting the commander rather than defeating him. Despite the fact that he was in command, they did not listen to him, prioritizing defense. To understand the situation, I thought I would make some noise here and attack their commander to speed things up. Using a jump, he jumped over the heads of the soldiers in the direction of their commander. The archers were ordered to shoot and stop him by firing an arrow with a rope. It hit, but did not stop the archer. On the contrary, it pulled him along. I caught it and flew down with it in my hands, and it caused them to stop attacking with arrows. Just before the landing, he released him, and the commander managed to escape from the soldier's hands. Only when I came face to face did I realize that this man was very strong. Their blows raised dust, and the soldiers were lying on their sides, looking at each other. One of the soldiers asked his commander if everything was okay, and he told him not to worry. Because he will be the enemy, I ordered him to focus on the situation outside the fortress walls. This guy is not a spy. He is a stranger and does everything on his own. Kim Soo-hyun was surprised by this because he had good judgment skills appropriate for a commander and an ability level equal to the A rank of the Awakened. As expected from this man, that's why people were worried about him and asked him to be careful. They looked at him with faith in their eyes, each of them ready to lay down their lives for him. 20 years ago, in the battle with Audrum, it was he who saved them and led them to victory, and this time, they will be able to win with him. Looking at this, I realized that I was right to feel that the soldiers believed in him, and that was probably why he was a hero. But no one knew that this faith was like shackles on this man's feet. He also had such shackles when he was a hero in that life. He said to the commander that he was sorry that he had to open the gate without permission. It was a very urgent matter, and asked if he would allow him to enter the fortress. But he was outraged, calling it a lie. Their kingdom was in martial law at such a time, who destroyed the gates and threatened the soldiers with no place in the fortress. He drew his hand back and shouted that in that case, he would have to commit the crime again. A way to capture a fortress without shedding blood and convince the person who had the most trust. Holding each other with blades, Maxman asked him in a stern tone who he was. He didn't notice that he had tied a rope around his arm while he was distracted, the one that had been on his leg earlier from the archer's arrow, but it was unclear how he did it. He turned on the transformation ability and used the giant's arm to swing at him. Through this person, he could learn all the secrets of this place and pass the test perfectly. And if it is possible to try to break his shackles, a powerful blow of stones was heard, and dust was thrown into the air. The soldiers were worried, and when everything was settled and it became clear that neither the guy nor the commander was there, the sergeant ordered the first half of the soldiers to search everything and find the commander, and the second half to be vigilant and defend the fortress. Commander Maxman fell from a black portal in one of the fortress's places. Behind him, Kim Soo-hyun calmly walked out, looking at where he had managed to get to. Still, he was happy to spend the points on the 15th floor to unlock such an ability. This skill was called the Tale of Shadows. It allowed you to move from one shadow to another, basically an attribute of awakened criminals. It takes a lot of time and mana to use it, as it was a complex skill with a limited number of uses per day, and it was perfect for this task. He prepared it just in case he needed to hide or infiltrate somewhere. He shook his head a few more times to make sure everything worked, and he managed to get into the fortress. The masked man felt that someone was a stranger and went in search of him. Kim Soo-hyun also felt that there was a very ugly smell in that place, but there was no time for that. He had to ask the commander all the secrets of the place. He hid his sword, knelt down to untangle the man's hand, and apologized for the situation because it was the only way to talk face to face. Maxman asked if his task was not to destroy the fortress and their kingdom, and was told that it was not. Then he got angry, because why would he destroy the gate and attack the knights in that case? In a calm voice, he explained to him that he had no other choice, because the soldiers were not letting him pass, and that he could not waste time because he was in a hurry. Because he has information that there will be problems in this fortress in the near future. The commander looked at me and asked if it had anything to do with Audrum, but he had no answer because he didn't know for sure, so he came everywhere. But if something happens, it will be much more terrible than a simple war between kingdoms. I asked him if anything strange had happened in the fortress recently. Climbing up on him, he said, even if something was happening, how could he believe it? How could he know that he was not a spy? After exhaling, Kim Soo-hyun explained that if he were a spy for another kingdom, he would not use such a complicated option, because he could easily destroy the fortress and all the soldiers, including him. Upon reflection, I really noticed that there was no one who could resist this guy after the sword strike. He went on to say that in the end, there was no other way out, and that he could not break him just because he did not believe him. Kim Soo-hyun asked him again if he would tell us what was really going on here. Putting the sword back in its place, the commander replied that there was nothing to guess and agreed to go with him in exchange. Taking the torch in their hands, they went, the commander leading him to the place where he thought he was looking for. After opening the iron bars, they saw a staircase leading downstairs and a spacious, huge room. For about 100 years, this place was used as a prison because of its powerful spiritual force, and most of the prisoners stayed here. In the end, the prison was built in another place, and this one was closed. Not many people knew about the existence of this place. But judging by his words, this was the only place that could suit him. But he wanted to understand what he was looking for here, and Kim Soo-hyun asked him to wait a little bit. He would see. The fortress was very stinky, and the smell never disappeared, a smell without living bodies, when suddenly someone shouted to them from behind. It was a follower who asked the commander what the hell he was doing here. In such a situation, the commander cannot leave his post, and besides, what is this guy doing near him? Kim Soo-hyun moved forward a little bit and asked him what he was doing here, since the prison was closed until the commander opened the door. The follower tried to talk himself out of it, saying that he had heard someone pass by, since in this situation, he had to watch what was happening in the fortress. After listening, I couldn't believe it, as it was very strange that such a perfect moment had developed, or that he was watching them. The masked man was outraged and immediately turned the conversation to the commander so that he would come to his senses. Because this guy is a violator, and how he, as a commander, allows this to happen, and he is also sure that he is manipulating him. In one lightning movement, Kim Soo-hyun struck a follower with no chance of survival. Maxman, who was standing there watching, immediately shouted out what it was, what he was doing. How could a follower of the king be killed? He shouted that he thought he was a spy. Turning around, I asked if he was a follower, what kind of strange mask he was wearing. At one point, they saw him stand up, and their eyes were riveted on him. The mask was destroyed, and the real Lich stood in front of them and looked at them. The commander was very shocked that it was a monster, and not a human being all along, what was happening in this country. Kim Soo-hyun stood and stared at the monstrosity, the smell of death and darkness filling the castle, where there had never been a war. The smell was enough to prove that Lich was behind everything that was happening in the fortress, and because of recent experience, this time, it was easier to discover this entity. However, it was different from the previous one because the latter was not a complete leech, and this one is real. He spoke first, asked where he came from, and noticed that the boy in front of him was not so simple. And Kim Soo-hyun said that maybe he was not from the kingdoms, and who knows, maybe he came from another world. Leech said that he might not be telling the truth, but in any case, his plans had changed. He began to conjure up a clot of energy in his fingers, pointed it at them, and said that he would finish her right there. Then the dark purple energy quickly headed in their direction. To stop this attack, Kim Soo-hyun grabbed his sword and rushed forward. He stopped abruptly, swung his sword, and Lich's attack scattered across the room. He looked at the guy and said that it was not difficult for him to do it, and he smiled. Its resistance to magic was much better than he expected, and the sword was most likely created using the highest grade of ethereal stone material. Kim Soo-hyun was pleased with the result. The weapon wouldn't break like it did last time, but it didn't solve all the problems, because Lich is a monster with dark powers. The attack won't work as expected, unless it's a critical hit or a holy attribute skill, and Maxman couldn't help, even though he was strong. It is difficult to unite with a person who did not have the skills of a sacred attribute. In this case, it was necessary to use the holy fire to crush Lich. The attack was quite strong and fast, but the monster managed to rebound and fly up. In this case, he tried to direct the fire from his sword at him. To stop this, he sent his dark energy to the meeting. But it didn't work. It was quite surprising that the flame could not suppress the spirit of Lich. Its power could not be compared to others because it was half as strong. And if he continued to use holy fire, he could at least hold out, but spending mana was not an option either. In any case, the battle had to end quickly, and there was no choice but to aim the sword at the Stone of Life. Despite the fast attacks that killed ordinary monsters, Lich had no trouble avoiding them. To avoid falling to the ground, he stuck his sword into the wall and stayed there. And with his other free hand, he directed the flames at him again. Several such attacks failed, and he dodged to the left and right. And after waiting for the moment, he accumulated energy again and hit the place where Kim Soo-kyung was hanging. Because of the smoke created by the blow, I managed to jump out of there and go into the monster's back. The blow was very strong, and I couldn't even understand how it happened. Quickly moving to the ground, he wanted to finish the fight with his next punch, but Lich released energy to form wings, which allowed him to stop him in his tracks. Such a trick made us think that the enemy was more serious than we had previously thought. He immediately rushed into battle, making dangerous attempts to destroy the enemy every time. As before, he skillfully fought off any danger with his sword. The fight stopped for a minute, and Lich went down to the ground, and they looked at each other intently. Kim Soo-hyun noticed one strange thing about having so much dark energy. It didn't look like he was seriously fighting. I had a feeling that he was not showing his full strength, which could mean that he either had other intentions or was up to something. Leech shouted with an evil smile that everything was ready and now the games were over. and the dark energy was no longer flying at Kim Suk-hung, but at Commander Maxman. We barely managed to get behind him and save him. But while they were doing this, the gate behind them was blown to pieces. The commander asked if the lichs were capable of controlling the darkness even so, but it was not so. It meant that this was his nest. A dark, creepy place where the light does not reach, and a place where images of hatred and energy are mixed up. Having overheard their conversation, the monster said that they had finally managed to understand everything. Everything was right. This place was a refuge. The cries of the destroyed people still echo sweetly. From behind them, two voices simultaneously told them that this was their shelter. We turned our heads and saw two more people coming out of the destroyed bars. It was already a problem that there were three of them, and they surrounded them. Kim Soo-hyun was now confident that although the fortress was large, thousands of soldiers were concentrated in a small area, and the leeches had broken in under the false pretense of followers. Leech in the red cape said that they had been dragging their feet for too long, so they didn't want to waste any more time on these losers. Maxim asked what they were saying and what their plan was, and Suhan asked him if he knew that these monsters also had a king. King Lich is the king of the Lichs, who ruled the world of the undead, and there are several ways to summon him, and one of them was a human sacrifice, and the commander's face showed shock. Since I immediately remembered the conversation in the corridor with him, I realized that these monsters would sacrifice soldiers. Confirming his words, he said that everything was correct and that King Leech would be called to this place. They appreciated this knowledge because people did not know that their king existed. Leech, with whom he was fighting, also spoke and said that they were right and their arguments were true. In search of a suitable sacrifice to resurrect the king, they came across this kingdom. After they invaded the kingdom, they removed the king. But they did not remove the body, but revived it by making it a puppet and manipulating it to appoint followers. Commander Maxman was losing his nerve, and his anger was expressed by calling the monsters low-grade. But the chief priest did not pay attention, saying that from the very beginning, the ceremony was supposed to take place in a month, but the altar was ready earlier than expected. Suhan noticed that the commander was about to get out of control and stopped him, allowing Leech to finish. He added that now their goal is to deal with them and perform the ceremony. After assessing the situation, I thought that 3 Lichs were quite difficult opponents, but not so difficult that I couldn't handle them myself. I just needed to adjust my mana. Chief Lich raised his hand, and his silhouette shone with purple energy, and a wall began to appear around Kim Suk-heng and Commander Maxman. But suddenly they were surrounded by a cube, and they stood there not knowing what to do. It was a barrier of darkness. It compresses the entire space of a higher-level Lich skill, so it could mean that this bastard was not a simple Lich. And since the others were bowing to him, he was the apostle of King Lich. He raised his hand and said that this was the end, and said goodbye to them. The cube began to close completely. Even attempts to ignite the flame failed. They went on, confident in their victory, because they knew they were finished. But suddenly the barrier broke into small pieces, and they stopped. And when they turned around, they were shocked as to how this could have happened. Commander Maxman managed to destroy it with a powerful blow of his sword. Chief Lich muttered that this was impossible, and that this skill was not subject to physical or magical attacks. They even started to panic about who he was, and whether he was carrying a holy sword. And he closed their mouths and asked them not to talk nonsense because he had a very ordinary sword. He grabbed his sword with both hands and said that he was just an ordinary paladin for killing their king and trying to sacrifice soldiers. He never asks them to come and make sure that they are sure to die here. Therefore, whatever their plan, he will put an end to them all and rush to attack. The first person to jump out was Leech in a red cape, who shouted that if it was true, he was a very annoying person. The main one ordered the second one to leave the fortress and call the zombies to surround the castle so that people could not escape. As a commander, Maxman could not allow these monsters to harm his men. To stop him, Red flew up and created an arrow of energy shouting to him to stop, and that he threw it forcefully in the direction of the paladin, hoping that it would destroy him. Suhan could not allow this to happen, so he called upon the holy fire and set the sword blade on fire. Then he summoned the phoenix, and it flew to meet the dark arrow. His strong beak made the arrow disappear into the air, and the bird turned around and looked at Lich. He shouted that this bird was crazy and he couldn't handle it. Phoenix noticed another one downstairs, and it was clear that he was afraid. And when the bird started to fly after him, he started to run away with all his strength, shouting that he hadn't done anything yet. While they were all busy and had a moment, Suhan turned around and asked the captain who he was. The fact that the king was gone, and the fact that a bunch of soldiers in this fortress might soon die, so you can see from him what he was going through. He talked to himself and asked to pull himself together, as it was not the time to give in to anger, but he did not know what to do. Suhan told the captain that he was the commander of this battlefield. He added that if he was okay, he wanted me to trust him and follow him at least this time. Then he asked if he was ready, and all the time they were talking, the Red Leech was fighting the Phoenix. Maxman looked down and found it really hard to think in this situation. Would it be right to leave him alone and leave? But he interrupted him and said that he still owed him a debt and would like to repay it. But time was running out, so he asked me to make a decision whether this fortress or the lives of the soldiers were more important to him. After these words, the captain silently turned around and headed for the exit. Then Suhen raised his sword, exhaled, and thought that the goalkeeper had meant it. Those words meant what he had to do, and a separate task for someone else on this battlefield. Captain Maxman is left to defend the soldiers when he has to. He did what he had to do and made a rather unexpected move. Chief Leech shouted out what the hell he was doing and what he had just done. Suhen stood calmly with his back to him and hid his sword back. At that time, a clear line formed on the wall from which light was coming through, and the wall moved. There was a pile of stones around, and they were falling everywhere, even on Lichev. This unusual move made them nervous and angry, and they even started calling him crazy. This noise attracted all the soldiers who were outside. The fortress collapsed, and from the rubble you could see purple dark energy trying to break through. As the apostle was hanging in the air, he first looked at everything and spoke with an angry voice. That they were only causing trouble because of their stupidity and would not repeat it, so he ordered them to go immediately and call in the zombies. If he doesn't start immediately, he'll kill him first, and then that guy. Chervoni was ordered to go and check the altar. The ceremony can only take place if the altar is intact. But suddenly, I turned my head red and saw the phoenix rushing toward him. I barely managed to jump out of the way, and the suddenness of it took my breath away. And the voice behind him, asking where he was going, made him scared. Passing exactly in the center of the Red Lich was defeated. He only managed to say when he had time. At this, the apostle growled and called him insolent, and as he dared. And he attacked quite quickly and strongly, even though it never worked. But it managed to distract his attention, and he managed to get downstairs. I put my hands together and began to accumulate energy. Suhen looked around and saw that he was stuck in the cube again, still in the air. Seeing that things were bad, Phoenix shouted with all his might. The cube began to crack and collapse, blue flames bursting out. And when it collapsed completely, he managed to jump out unharmed and was pleased with the result. Leech paused and began to tell him to stop floundering, as he knew that the bird absorbs all the mana, and if he accepted defeat, he would do everything quickly. Suhen smiled and confirmed that he was right. The bird was consuming a lot of mana. But who says he'll be powerless if he runs out of mana? Before Captain Maxman was about to leave, he shouted out if there was anything he could do to help. Then he came back and told him that everything was fine, and that he had already helped him enough, since he managed to borrow his holy sword ability through transformation. And now we can start this fight in earnest, so I shouted to him to get ready. Although there were soldiers after the battle, there were no casualties or injuries. And during the destruction of the fortress, none of them were covered with debris. Lich came out and looked at them and muttered that the apostle always grumbled a lot, and if they did not do what he said, he would get angry, and there would be trouble. Then he climbed even higher, raised his hands to the mountain, and shouted for the zombies to rise up. The zombies were very similar to the lychees and had the shape of skeletons. The soldiers realized that the monster hovering in the air was calling zombies and wanted to attack it. But then Captain Maxman came to the surface and called his sergeant. He told him that everything would be fine and was able to evacuate all the nearest knights so that there would be few casualties. But this was not a priority now, and I asked if the gate repair had been completed, and the sergeant replied that it was not complete. The captain ordered to block the gate by all possible means, as they had to save the fortress, and he would deal with this monster. But the sergeant objected and did not want to go, saying that the advanced soldiers would deal with the zombies, and they would be with him. Maxman listened, smiled, and ordered us to stand on the defense and follow him. When I looked at Lich, I thought that it was not about fighting, but about his duty to protect the soldiers, and that the other guy had to finish the rest of the job, who at that very moment was trying to finally reach the main Lich. Although he was skillfully dodging all the time, one attack managed to cut a piece of his skull. Screaming in pain, he flew to the ground, dust rose, and pieces of the wall flew off. I stood up on my elbows and couldn't believe that people were capable of such things. For almost 100 years, he became stronger and stronger and dared to say that he was the strongest among the apostles. However, he did not understand how he could not resist just one person. And the sword blade finally hit the lifestone, and Lich froze in place. He managed to speak even with his life stones cut in half. Namely, that he could not lose and fall in such a place, and their plans were ruined. Suhen watched, and was surprised that he hadn't disappeared yet, proof that this was no ordinary Lich. I shouted at him not to crucify himself in vain, and these words made him angry. He shouted out that thousands of apostles were working day and night to resurrect the king, and even if he had 10 years to spare, he would not stop them. Therefore, in the end, the king will rise and plunge the world into darkness. Then Suhen came up to him and repeated that it was all in vain, because their king leech would fall by his hand anyway. He struck at it with his sword, and it began to scatter across the ruined room. And indeed, what he told Lich was true, because King Lich had entered the world in his past life through outbreaking, and he was the one who defeated him, and it is strange that both in the dungeon and now Lichy was remembered as their king. It could also mean that his resurrection could have happened earlier than he thought, and in general, progress is going faster than it was then. First, I had to deal with everyone who was in front of me, and then I would think about the future, and there was only Lich. I wondered if the captain was holding up well at the time he fought him. Maxman realized that it was difficult to resist him because his movements were unpredictable, and he also took advantage of his weakness in aerial combat. But the first task was not to shoot it down, but to be careful not to let it get close to the soldiers. And soon the guy was going to come, so we had to hold on a little longer, and Leech's look changed dramatically. He was frozen in the air, not moving, and only muttering that his friends were gone. The captain was happy. It meant that the guy had finally made it. Leech abruptly began laughing, screaming, and behaving quite frantically. A huge seal of energy enveloped the castle and its immediate area. The soldiers fell to the ground, grabbed their throats, and felt it was hard to breathe. The commander yelled at him to stop torturing his subordinates immediately. He knew that ordinary soldiers would not be able to withstand such a level of spiritual power if his skill remained active. But suddenly, like a bullet, something passed by the captain, and he could not even see what it was. Suhen, with a clenched fist, was approaching Lich very quickly. Clenching his teeth, he struck him in the neck with such force that if it had been an ordinary monster, he would have been dead in a second. The impact sent the monster flying into the tower behind him. Maxman was happy to see the boy, and asked if he had managed to defeat the creature, and heard that he had. Looking back at the soldier, he said that he was not doing well, and if he had been even a little bit late, nothing would have happened here. This Lich used the ability Absorption of the Dead to absorb the energy of the dead, and living within the area of effect, and use magic to make them stronger. Then Suhen remembered what he had meant by the gate, that if possible, no one should be destroyed. If the number of victims had increased, the magic would have been stronger than it is now. Despite the fact that he was an apostle of King Lich, he should not have been able to do this alone, and generally looked like a subordinate of Lich, whom he managed to defeat. Surrounding himself with a barrier, he shouted like a madman that he would not forgive anyone and would kill everyone. Then he lifted his head up, opened his jaw, and blood spurted out in a fountain. In this way, he was able to call a staff to his aid and cried out loudly. The captain noticed that this Lich used his staff to drive a wedge to protect his magic circle that absorbed the forces. Suhen also realized that by absorbing large amounts of power, he would bring back the zombies, so he had to be able to get to the life stones. The fact that Leech was surrounded by a barrier did not allow the blow to pass through, which only made him laugh, and he said that it was a spell with a pledge of his own life. And if he wanted to stop all magic, he had no choice but to destroy it. After hearing this, I decided to retreat, and I had to figure out what to do. We could try to capture him, but we had to do it quickly. And Maxman shouted at him from behind to not worry about the soldier because he had a task to destroy the monster. And his task is to protect the soldiers at any cost, and he will do it. With all his might, the captain drove the sword into the ground, blue streams of energy bursting out from under it. The blue energy began to expand rapidly and managed to form a dome over the fortress. The soldiers began to get up and noticed that the energy that was pressing on their bodies and preventing them from breathing had disappeared. Maxman said that as a paladin, this was his best and last skill. It increased morale and destroyed the attribute of darkness in the area of action. But the problem was that it was taking his life energy, but even if it was his last breath, he would do anything to protect the knights. Then it was up to Suhen to deal with Leech, and the latter, in turn, not only sat under his protection, but also tried to attack. Thanks to their skills and speed, these attacks, although powerful, were easily repelled. Even though he shouted and pressured him, calling him garbage and saying that he would not succeed alone and would still sacrifice thousands of people for the sake of his friends. When he found the right moment, he was able to strike the staff with his sword, and it cracked. Then he grabbed the place with his hand and said that thousands of people they had killed and were going to kill were also friends or family. Leech's expression changed and glowed blue. Cian wasn't going to drag it out any longer and wanted to deal with him as soon as possible. And he shouted that now that he understood what it was like to lose those who were dear to him, he had retained this feeling. Let him go to hell and pass all this on to his already destroyed friends. And the sword struck the lifestone and passed through Lich's entire body. The holy flame came out of all the cracks, as he managed to say that he had been defeated by a human being. Immediately after the destruction of the staff and Lich, the zombies he summoned began to fall. Up until that moment, Captain Maxman had kept his barrier up for the sake of all people. And as soon as I was convinced that it was over, I could no longer stand on my feet. Suhen came up just in time and caught him by the arm before he could fall. When the captain heard that he had destroyed all the Lichs, he breathed a sigh of relief. Before getting drunk with victory, he wanted to take a break and asked if the guy was okay. In turn, he also collapsed on the ground from fatigue, wiping the sweat from his forehead and wanting to rest a little too. Meanwhile, in Seoul, in the building of the Awakened Management Agency, a man in a suit shouted that in 3 months, the dungeon would appear in the city of Anyang and cause outbreaks of greater nonsense than I have ever heard. It was the director of the Awakened Agency, Sun Ken-T, and he was very unhappy. He yelled at Juho that he was offering to take his word for it, and he proved that people cannot predict the appearance of a dungeon, let alone that outbreaking would begin immediately after it. Even when dungeons appear, they cannot immediately cause such events. At least a month must pass. Juho calmly said that even once the process of the dungeon's emergence went beyond common sense. But whatever happens, this problem cannot be overlooked, as the population of Anyang is 600,000 people, and they were all under threat. And the director intercepted the words and said that if they did nothing, his head would fall off his shoulders, and then 60 million people could suffer because of the fear. Kim Do came into the office. He was from the Awakened Agency with an A rank and asked me to stop because there was no end to such conversations. The director asked him what he thought about all this and whether it made sense, to which he said that such cases had never happened, but that Juho's arguments were also correct. The problem was in the second, namely, how reliable the information was. Unless he was influenced by ogres and asked directly who gave him this information. As calmly as before, he said that the source was very obvious and they had probably already heard the name. This message was from Kim Soo-hyun, and they were both surprised because they knew that the newcomer could change his rank and make a quiet mess in the abyss. The director asked him suspiciously if he knew him personally, but Kim Do knew that a man named Kim Soo-hyun was also in the dungeon with Juho. Although the information said that he had only C rank, Juho was right, so he asked if the director had changed his mind. After a moment's silence, he said no, and nothing had changed. Since there was no data confirming his identity, they could not trust him. And what will happen if he does trust him and evacuates all the citizens, but nothing happens, and he will be responsible for everything as a director? On the other hand, the dungeon is a kind of natural disaster, and even if most of them die, he will not be held responsible for it all. Juho was shocked that he would purposely pretend to be unaware of the situation just because he didn't want to take responsibility. Son Kyung-tae added at the end that he had the last word, so he emphasized that he should consider that this conversation did not take place. Meanwhile, the system informed Soo-hyun that he had passed the test with flying colors and was awarded 100,000 points, as well as increased strength, agility, and endurance. He breathed a sigh of relief and agreed that it was very difficult, because after all, 3 lichs of the Apostle opposed him. And it was only on the 20th floor and the 10th level of difficulty, but it was a significant achievement nonetheless. The coefficient was 70, and the level of magical power was at the 7th level, which corresponded to the S rank. The system reported the calculation of achievements. The number of windows meant that he could get help from as many people as he wrote the assignment at first, and then it became clear why he was given a month to do it. And because I was used to doing everything alone, I had a strange feeling that I was in the red. Then I noticed how the people under the leadership of Captain Maxman cleaned up and rebuilt everything quite quickly. So it made me change my mind a bit, because at least this time he was not alone. The commander told his men that the affairs in the fortress were settled, but the kingdom of Udrum could attack at any moment, so he ordered to rebuild the gates as soon as possible. Soo-hyun came up to him and asked if he was very busy, and he looked at the guy. He said that he came up just in time because he was looking for him and thought that he had already left without treating his injuries. Maxman smiled and said that he wanted to thank him in front of everyone, but Soo-hyun said that was why he ran away. Scratching his neck, he looked away and said that he was embarrassed when people praised him. The captain's smile disappeared, and he looked at him carefully, as he had done the same after contributing to the last battle. Of course, this title did not seem unpleasant, but the more time passed, the harder it became to carry this burden. And a little later, he began to feel the burden of being called a hero. However, after he said that his task was to protect the soldiers, his mind came back to normal. Glad to have helped the captain, he added that the answer is always closer than you might think. Since the king was gone, the kingdom had a lot of things to do, and the first thing to do was to sort out the fortress. Hearing Soo-hyun's further plans, he told him it was time to move on, and this alarmed the man. But his business was completed here, and he leaves the rest to him. The captain looked at him and stopped him, and said that it might sound rather rude to say this, judging by what he had said earlier, but the soldier who saved the fortress continued, putting his fist to his chest. He wants to tell everyone that it was him, and thanked him for everything, wishing him a good trip. Soo-hyun smiled. It was nice to hear him say that, and the system showed that he had achieved the highest reward, namely the skill Hero Immortal. While working out in the gym, Barun was lifting a heavy dumbbell and shouted to Juho in irritation to get him to pick up the phone because he doesn't want to listen to his old-fashioned ringtone on the phone, and after finishing the approach, to see who was calling in the middle of the night. Then he picked up the phone and said hello to Soo-hyun, who asked if it was okay that it was so late, but he was expecting a call from him, so it was okay. What he heard was shocking, and he did not understand how it happened and why he was in the hospital. In the morning, he did not want to be in the hospital anymore and was going to leave, and all the doctor's arguments did not stop him, as he knew that he would be cured faster when awake. But he was annoyed that they made so much noise, because he felt better. Juho flew to him as soon as he could and immediately shouted out how he was feeling. As soon as we sat down on the bench, I asked him again if he was okay because his arm was creaking strangely. I had to clear the 20th floor in one day and thought I could have been badly injured, but when I saw the rank, I realized it was just incredible. I even asked if there was a secret and asked for advice, but Soo-hyun had no advice. Well, seeing that everything was going well, I got down to business and started telling him about his request and that he had failed to fulfill it, and I also revealed his identity. But it didn't surprise him because he thought it would, and he didn't expect to be a director from the very beginning. In his previous life, he was a senior in the agency's department. Juho continued that one way or another he could not be persuaded, but there was information from a close aide of Kim Do. They said that a green dungeon had appeared in Gyeonggi-do Ansan and that they were planning to storm it, and some awakened ones were already gathering in Ansan. Soo-hyun realized that he had also been called there in the past, and because of this, he could not prepare for the outbreak in Anyan. Director Song Kyung-tae was too busy dodging responsibility, so the late response played a role. He was a sod who thought only of himself. Juho saw Soo-hyun's face scrunch up and turn red, but he had to ask since the time and appearance of the dungeon were exactly the same as he had learned. But he went on to thank him for all his efforts, and if everything worked out that way, he had to go with Plan B, and would continue to act on his own. Because I had already asked him for help enough, and could not ask for more. But Juho said that it was not enough, and that it was not the time to wait for help from the agency, so he asked to tell him about the plan, because there would definitely be something he could help with. Kim Soo-hyun smiled and understood him, so he said he would tell him his plan. 2 months later, on December 17th, the Sunday before Christmas, the Online Abyss wrote that a terrorist attack from the Dome Guild was planned for the 24th. Even the news report said that this article has recently disturbed various social networks, including the Online Abyss. It was not clear whether the Dome Guild's prediction was true, but they had an awakened one who really saw this guild. And the host handed the microphone to the man and asked if this guild was a real organization. Juho replied that he felt it personally. Although his face was calm inside, he was worried because he was entrusted with a very difficult job. Barun, who was watching TV, was shocked, and from what he said, he almost got hurt a lot because of the recent capture of the Gwangju dungeon. The director of the awakened agency was beside himself at this prank because the appearance of the dungeon was already making his head spin. Kim Do adjusted his glasses and said that there was nothing to be done about it. They could not prevent the autonomous actions of each awakened person. The director shouted that it was 100% the work of Kim Soo-kyung and asked if he had found out who the assistant was. A month ago, he appeared in the abyss, but it was not clear why he was making such a fuss and what he was up to. Soo-hyun himself was far away from there and had been drinking the same substance for a long time. It made his body ache and his heart beat faster. The veins in my body began to glow blue, and as soon as the pain was gone, I started laughing crazily. The owner of the hotel came to his room and knocked loudly on the door, trying to shout to him. He had delayed the rent for a whole month, and there was no answer for several days, and he was shouting what he was doing there. I grabbed the door handle, was surprised that it was open, and made sure the guest was alive. And even he felt that the incredible energy from the guest was audible from the room. Getting dressed, he apologized and said that he would pay extra for the inconvenience and asked if he would stay. But Soo-hyun smiled and told the man no, and that it was time for him to move on. In a flash, he disappeared and left a bag of gold coins where he had been. On December 23rd, a month has passed since I gave Juho the task and came to the tower and bought an incredible magic catalyst with the accumulated points. It cost him a whopping 2 million points when he paid the seller in one go, and his eyes nearly popped out. And then he locked himself in a room and started drinking the catalyst and practicing to tame the magical energy. The taste and smell was disgusting, but thanks to this, I was able to get into an incredible state, like now, just before the final battle. In the Ares Guild, the driver came to the head's office and told him it was time to leave. Ju Dongyeon turned his head and ordered Hak Jun to get ready as well, since it was time. He looked at his mentor with a not-so-kind look and replied that he was ready. While walking to the car, he read about the Dome Guild on his phone, but he knew that they were a criminal organization and were in the shadows. The mentor asked him what he thought about it, and he thought that there was a possibility of a terrorist attack when a green dungeon appeared, but he did not know whether such measures were necessary. But Ju Donan corrected him and clarified that he was interested in the opinion of the person who wrote it. Because only a few awakened people know about the existence of this organization, and to find out who brought them to the surface, I conducted an investigation. That's how he found out that this post was written by Kim Soo-hyun and asked if he knew the name. I was also thinking of conducting an investigation to understand why this guy would frame the Dome Guild. Hak Jun was somewhat curious and wondering why a writer who was not interested in anything but profit was so interested in it. To worry so much about this case, and who cared about the Dome Guild? When I got into the car, I looked at the director and wondered if their guild and he were somehow connected. And besides, Kim Soo-hyun was only a C rank and didn't think it was him, so it was strange that it was in his head again. In the city of Ansan, a group of young men were sitting in an alley and bored because they had nothing to do, because it was too quiet and there was no one to beat up. They discussed that there were no people because the head of the gang was afraid, called it all a lie, and did not see that there was someone behind him. The masked man told them that it was not a lie, and the young men's attention was focused on him. They looked and could not understand who this strange man was, who had picked on them. The gang leader began to yell at him, saying that he would now repent, and asked him what kind of mask he was wearing. They laughed and were happy that there was a case, and now they would beat this madman. But the man in the masses was Kim Soo-hyun, who approached and managed to lift the leader above him with just one hand. Then he threw it at his frightened comrades, who were standing behind him. He took out his sword and put its shiny blade close to his face. Then he said that he was not a madman, but one of the members of the Domp gang, and there was an explosion. The whole gang squealed like little girls and almost peed their pants in fear. Then we recovered and ran away as fast as we could, fearing for our lives. On television, all programs were interrupted to report the urgent news that the explosion had taken place in the Pyeongchon-dong district of Anyang. It was assumed that the person who caused the online controversy over this situation was right, and that the residents would be urgently evacuated. The director of the Awakened Guild was holding his head from the news. The assistant read that witnesses said that one person was behind it all. After thinking it over, the director decided to leave everything to Kim Do, and he agreed. Then he ordered him to gather all the available Awakened ones and to catch Kim Suk-hung. I was salivating when I shouted that this guy was a criminal. And Soo-hyun himself stood on the roof of the skyscraper and watched everything burn, confident that he had caused a little bit of a stir. Buildings and cars appeared to be engulfed in flames, but in reality they were not. When the Holy Flame skill grew, he was able to create the illusion of burning. It was good that there had been no casualties so far, so the evacuation was on time, and just as the time came, a voice behind us asked us to stop. They were agents who came to defeat him and threatened to stop terrorism right now. Adjusting his glasses, Kim Do introduced himself and asked to obey the arrest. Soo-hyun turned to look at them and saw that only the older one knew what was in front of him. The others had not been informed. When he took out his sword, he asked me to be quiet because there was a lot of chatter on his part. He pointed the sharp ends at them and asked them to attack all at once without further ado, as he had no time. The faces of those awakened showed that some were surprised, others were alarmed, and still others were angry. They rushed into the fight, shouting that he shouldn't be so bold, even if he was a super newbie. The first to attack was a guy with red hair, and he had wanted to meet him for a long time. Soo-hyun did not pay attention to provocations and chatter, and during the fight tried to assess which rank was in front of him at the moment, determining that he was fighting with B or higher rank. While he was distracting attention with a melee attack on the back, the other guy tried to accumulate energy or attack from a distance. And in seconds, a purple beam swooped forward and almost hit him. And Do and the man in the green coat were standing behind him, and the man asked him why he was not attacking, since he was the strongest among them. He replied that he noticed one thing here, that something was not clean. Meanwhile, the others tried everything they could to get to and defeat Kim Soo-hyun. But it was all in vain. He either managed to avoid the blows or looked for an opportunity to counterattack. Even when another participant intervened and hit him with a hammer, creating a cloud of dust, he still managed to walk away unharmed. Catching his breath, Soo-hyun thought that most of those who came had skills beyond B rank. Then Kim Do appeared in the dust and said the words, "Page and wings." A page with wings appeared above Soo-hyun and lifted him into the air. And then he asked that everything was on fire and without any damage, since the houses were in good condition. So he wanted to ask, why does he want to evacuate people under the guise of terrorism, and is it not related to outbidding? But he refused to answer, wanting him to try to defeat him first, and then let him ask. Kim Do slammed the book shut and smiled, because in this case, he had no choice but to do so. In an instant, Soo-hyun felt and saw that he was already hanging outside the skyscraper. The next thing that happened was that it started to fall down at a high speed. Then the curtain in the air recited the spell of 5 stars to form a lightning strike. Then there was an explosion, and lightning discharges combined with the cloud from the explosion. Then Kim Do landed softly on the ground, holding a book over his left hand. And in front of him, Soo-hyun also landed unharmed. He was surprised because he shouldn't have dodged in the air, but he didn't have a scratch on him and realized he couldn't resist it. Dusting himself off, Soo-hyun noticed that his opponent was most likely at the top of the A rank. But he didn't need to get out of character and shout that he thought they had shown him all their worthlessness enough. The rest of them started to land on the ground, but Kim Do looked at him and thought it was something incredible. A magician came up and asked if he was doing well, and he asked him and his team to buy some time, because I had to send a request for help to the Agency of the Awakened. It was impossible to drag it out, and all the forces of the Awakened had to be mobilized right at this point. The guy with the red hair was still trying to get to him and lacked speed. Soo-hyun also managed to kick him lightly in the back of the head so that he flew headlong into the front. With a bump on his head, he shouted whether he would finally fight or continue to play. The magician took his friend by the shoulder and said that he was stronger than they thought, and that he had heard that he had passed the first floor in less than 2 years. And even the second one recognized and said earlier that this guy had a magic sword and fought only with it on purpose. Dao, who was watching, recognized that he had incredible skill and thought that he was not yet fully developed. And despite such fighting power, I could not understand why he had not yet revealed his identity. But it was obvious that Kim Soo-hyun was an S-ranked officer and that his abilities were probably much higher. He pulled his hand back and ordered to attack slowly until help arrived. And he clarified, just in case, that the attacks were coming only from their side. Soo-hyun heard what he was saying and appreciated his wit, as he urged them not to waste their energy in vain, but only when the situation was serious. There were 2 reasons why I had to hide my identity and hold such a show. The first reason was to determine the power of the awakened ones who came after him, and to find out right now how much power he could use with their help in battle. And secondly, to lure more fighters, because if he said he was not a terrorist, the director would not send anyone to help him, because it was not important to him. But when a terrorist threatened national security, things took a completely different turn, because it was broadcast by the media. And now they had to wait for help to arrive, as there were 2 hours left before the outbreak. Kim Do was watching him all the time. Even now, when they were standing still, he didn't see him trying to attack. At that time, a group that came to their aid was approaching their battlefield. They were standing on the top of a skyscraper, 6 of them, wearing identical clothes. When I saw this, I adjusted my glasses again and was surprised because if these people came, the director was furious. An organization of state, Awakened, who were selected and trained by an agency to manage the Awakened as a kind of special forces under the command of an agency called the ACT. They were led by S-ranked Captain Park Young-gyu, who was a very strong Awakened person, or rather, one of the strongest among all S-ranks, and Soo-hen remembered him from his past life. The captain asked to report the situation, and the man on the back said that as he saw the enemy was stronger, and according to the report, the enemy's name was Kim Soo-hen, but he had a rank of C. Despite his rank, his actual skills were S-ranked, so his level was equated. The most vocal among the ACT was Vice Captain Kang Seung-chul, ranked A. He shouted out why they were behaving like this in front of them, but the captain told him to be quiet and not to lose his vigilance. Then he turned to Do because he didn't know how strong his opponent was, so he didn't think he should start first, and he replied that he was right. So he said he would start the fight after his subordinates who rushed down from the skyscraper. The captain followed, but Kim Do was worried that even if his student was an A-ranked soldier, he would be able to resist the enemy. But he reassured him, since the battles of the special forces were different from those of the other awakened ones. Soo-hen looked at him and saw that nothing had changed in the captain. He was the same as before. He didn't care that he suffered when he was training him and tried his best to prove himself. But this was good, because it also meant that the methods of educating students were the same as they were then. But to make sure, he wanted to check once if his theory was true. They rushed straight into the battle. They were quite serious opponents. Then they started running in a circle around him at a fairly high speed. The others did not understand what was happening, and Do adjusted his glasses and said that at first glance, it looked like a normal run, but it was not. Each had his own type of weapon, and while running, each attacked unexpectedly. But the main person in this combination was the Deputy Captain Kang Seung-cho. Despite the rapid attacks, Soo-hen did not give up and repelled each of their attacks. And the team that was standing behind him noticed that the act was really working rapidly, and suddenly the attack scheme was assembled into one, so it was borderline blocking. Systematic attacks incorporated deterrent support and powerful attack strikes from all sides designed to catch strong people or bosses. Then the captain added that it was the perfect all-around attack, an ability only the awakened Acta had. Kang Seung-chu shouted at Soo-hyun not to dodge like a rat, but to show his skills, and then he passed by him with his big sword almost hitting him. But his goal was to get the second one off the ground so that the center point would collapse. Then chains appeared and began to wrap around Soo-hen. It was a chain attack called webbing that tightly enveloped his entire body. And the next step was to be Kang Sin-chao's attack, which was supposed to end the battle. After the impact, pieces of asphalt and dust were thrown into the air, and it was impossible to see what was happening. The impact broke the chains, and the ACT team stood there watching until everything settled down. And there was a scream, and Kim Suk-hang appeared, and behind him, tied to a sword, was Kang Shin-chao. He calmly walked out and listened to the team cheek by jowl that their attack had failed. But he shouted that it wasn't so, that he knew their tactics from the very beginning. When he was tied up and swung his sword, he moved to the front of his torso, which deviated from the trajectory of the sword and broke the chains. In addition, he used the chains in reverse order, but thought it was better to keep quiet about it because it was shameful. Kim Do also stood there with his mouth open, because no matter how much he felt like a soldier, he managed to do everything in a split second. Soo-hen himself thought that of course he knew about it, since he had been a member of the team in the past, and was trained in all the smallest tactics of combat. The captain pulled out his katana and said he was wrong and should have attacked first. He recognized that he was very skillful, and if they met in another place, he suggested that they could even work together, so that such power as his is not misused. Kim Do asked the captain to be more careful as the awakenings were gathering in this area. Hak-jun also arrived at that place, got out of the car and looked around at the fire. Soo-hen also looked around to see that the awakened ones had finally begun to gather around. Then he mentally said that he had once thought about fighting the captain properly, but now was not the time for that, and his hand opened and his sword fell out. Then he raised his hands in the air, was silent for a couple of seconds, and shouted that he was surrendering without a fight. People around him did not understand this move at all. They even wanted to see the fight. Some even asked if they had heard what he had just said, and thought it would be better to accept the challenge. Captain Park Young-gyu was surprised by what his words had just meant. When the time was exposed, the time 1800 was written there, and there was no need to waste energy on these fights anymore. From that moment on, the real battle would begin. Instantly, the ground shook under their feet, and the awakened ones could barely stand, and one of them even fell. A green portal opened in the sky above that place, illuminating the area with its color. Immediately after its appearance, there was an outbreak, and it became even brighter. Soo-hen began to say that as they see the emergence of the dungeon and the speed of the outbreak, things will become even more unpredictable in the future. Opening his hand, the fire began to flow into it and be absorbed back. When Kim Do saw this, he knew it was his ability. Soo-hen shouted that they might hate him for not telling the truth from the beginning, and, as an awakened man, he wanted to ask everyone for forgiveness. to unite and fight with him against a common enemy this time. Going to the portal, he added that together they would protect the city of Anyan and its inhabitants. Sweat broke out on Hakjun's face because it turned out that the guy was the real Kim Soo-hyun. The sudden outbreak in the city of Anyang is the beginning of an anomaly that will threaten the world in the future. As you know, a flashpoint is a phenomenon that occurs when a dungeon has not been attacked for some time since its inception, but this was a special situation. Looking up, I realized that from now on, such things would happen more and more often. Then I turned to the owner, Kim Do, and asked him how many supporters he had available, and he replied that he had about 100 people. He then thanked him for his work and for realizing his true intentions in time, but he denied it, saying that it was actually because he pretended to be a terrorist that he was able to invite support more quickly. The awakened people were interested in what they were talking about and realized that in the end, they knew about the outbreak. Then one guy shouted that everyone looked at the place where the portal was. From there, the first monster appeared, roaring very loudly and angrily. Kim Do realized that this was still an outbreak of the Green Dungeon, which meant that very strong monsters would come out of it. And then a large number of monsters appeared en masse from the portal, all eager to join the battle. Their size was impressive to many of the awakened ones who were in such a situation for the first time. Some stood shaking and just watched, while one of the awakened ones could not do anything. Captain Park Yoon-gyu rushed in just in time and saved the boy from the inevitable by stopping the blow. Even he was shocked that each monster was at the level of a red or orange dungeon boss. When the guy was running away, he shouted to everyone to be more careful and not to lose their heads. He ordered the act to help the awakened ones prepare for the battle. But when he tried to challenge his decision, there was an explosion behind him, and blue fire spread around him. Soo-hyun said that all those who were in doubt in such a situation, just like him, who did not look back in such a situation, needed to be reassured. Therefore, if he was not mistaken, it was the act that was supposed to cope with this task, so he asked me to do everything possible using my position. Of course, Kang Seung-chu didn't like it, and was very annoyed that he was talking and saying the same things as his mentor. Soo-hyun used a jump, and found himself in the air where there were a lot of flying monsters. He waved his sword and used the holy flame, and most of them were destroyed. One by one, they fell to the ground, and Soo-hyun was left alone in the air. When he landed on the skyscraper, he thought that Park Yoon-gyu should deal with the monsters of the Green Dungeon himself, and that thanks to the whole act, the evacuation would be better. Thanks to this, we didn't have to worry about small monsters. So he looked intently at the portal and waited for his main opponent to appear. And then a great monster with wings came out, called the half-dragon Igelos. Kim Do saw him, so he ordered that we hurried to evacuate people because there was only half of them. He realized that thanks to the premature evacuation, there were no casualties yet. But if the monsters were not stopped, the damage could be greater. What is the most terrible thing, not only for the city of Anyan, but for the whole country?